Good afternoon, everybody. I like the avatar, Alan.
Oh yeah, I've been kind of on a Herzog binge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch Aguirre, The Wrath of God tonight.
Ah, Jesus.
I watched Nosferatu yesterday, yesterday.
Yeah, the original.
No, not the Murnau one, the Herzog one.
Cool. Very cool.
Nosferatu the Vampire. I liked it better than the original, which is very hard to do. But I really liked that one.
Cool. Very cool.
How easy do you think it is to find one of those these days?
Find what?
The Murnau Nosferatu.
Probably on Prime or something. Amazon, you could find it.
There's pieces of it on YouTube. I don't know if it's the whole.
I found the whole film on YouTube once. I will put it in for my film history class. We had to watch Nosferatu. And I found the whole film on.
If you like Murnau, you should check out Sunrise.
Yeah, I watched Sunrise. I had to watch Sunrise. I had to watch Nosferatu. The first one that made me watch was Birth of a Nation.
Oh yeah.
Because it's Griffith.
It's pretty influential, but very bad messaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. Griffith had the whole thing that Griffith's film was based on was actually a book called The Klansman.
Yeah, it was propaganda for the KKK.
Yeah. But wait, the KKK was dead when the film came out, and it came back because of the film.
Yeah, it kind of. Well, wouldn't say dead, but I'd say it was not as prominent, I guess.
Hibernating.
Yeah.
But that's confusing because when we talked about it in my history class, they exist. The last time they were around was like the 1870s, and they'd been gone for almost 50 years.
I don't know. Gone is the right word. Yeah. I don't know.
This day and age ought to tell you that nothing's ever actually gone, huh?
Yeah.
Just sleeping under the surface, waiting to be reignited by the new round of impressionable and uneducated and ill-informed people who don't understand the implications and the circumstances involving whatever this ideology was as it erupted the last time.
Yeah.
This is a film class. I mean, there is politics in film, but
lots of politics in film. More than you think.
More so this day, and that's why you got people leaving Hollywood.
Yeah, you got like stuff like McCarthyism and all that. I know back then.
That's in the 50s, but this is a whole different thing.
I don't think you're going to find people leaving Hollywood for any political ideology. You'll find them leaving Hollywood for a lot of other reasons, though, economics and some of it has to do with failed hopes and dashed dreams, you know.
Well, hey, come on over here to Florida. We got a film industry building up.
I've heard that one before.
No, serious. Like over near my hometown, we got stuff going in.
Buddy, that rumor's been going around once every decade for the last generation. The last time I lived in Florida, the same rumor was going around, and it actually, to some extent, came true for about 14, 15 years.
There are some filmmakers from Florida. Trey Edward Schultz is an emerging indie director from Florida. Sean Baker.
A lot of folks that came from Florida.
The guy who did Moonlight, Barry Jenkins, he was from FSU.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he shot it.
What's his name down from University of Miami, who directed some of the Game of Thrones? David Nutter graduated University of Miami as a production assistant.
The guys who did the Blair Witch Project are UCF alumni.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I've also heard a big rumor from Universal that they're expanding their park a little bit, and they're going to try and transfer part of it over to where they're building Nintendo Land to make it to reopen their old studio over here.
Mhm.
Cool.
It would be nice to know that there was that it was sustainable, but full scale production hasn't been here in quite a while. So not that you guys have not to your understanding of full size production. Okay, I'm talking about Hollywood level stuff. It's we had that here at one point in time. We did, but that, like everything else, runs its course. The film industry is very fashionable, you know. In the days that we had an industry here in the early late 80s and early 90s, everything was about NASA and astronauts and the beach, and so there was plenty of demand for that kind of content, and so those locations were very popular, and the studios were built in a response to that sort of early demand, and it ran its course. Like I said, by 99 2000, the industry was already on the way out. It was already looking for someplace else to go, and by 2002, I was already leaving to go to LA. So by the mid 2000s, the industry had pretty much pulled up stakes in Orlando. I'd like to see it come back, though. There's plenty of opportunity here now, and there's plenty of incentive, I think. With the exception of local government, you know, the Florida state government has never really been a film friendly institution, unfortunately.
Until recently, with the one we got right now.
Well, I don't know. I would interpret a film friendly Tallahassee as one that would reinstate the tax incentives and the tax buybacks and stuff, which they haven't done. So until they do something like that and show a genuine interest in recapturing some of that industry, unless they're willing to throw money at the problem, which at the moment they're not willing to do, you're not really going to see much return here that's going to be of a real economic benefit.
True.
Tax incentives are the things that drew business and siphoned business off of Los Angeles in the first place.
True.
And it was aggressive tax incentives, 30% tax buybacks on total budget spent in states like, well, Texas did a little bit of it. Louisiana did a lot of it. Georgia became very aggressive in the late, more like the early 2000s. And trying to draw business, siphon business off of Hollywood. And they were pretty successful at it because they had a 30% tax incentive. And that's what drew the business in. If you're going to get back $300,000 on every $1 million you spend, you can do a lot with that dividend. You can do, you can make a bigger movie. You can make a cheaper movie. You can buy more prestigious actors. You can do a lot of things with 30% buyback. So that's what talks, right? Money talks and BS walks, right? So
pretty much the whole thing from what I've been seeing, a lot of films have been going into like digital. Like one of my favorite web series, most of its stuff's it does online stuff. Like they do most of their web series is mainly some of the largest web series have been on for like 10 years, and they've been doing it online.
I would love to see that business come back to Orlando. There's no reason why it couldn't. The video game industry is fairly large and pretty quiet in Orlando, all things considered. I mean, the video game industry is a highly profitable economic engine, and they don't make a whole lot of noise here in Orlando like I think they could.
Well, EA is about to move their headquarters from wherever it is now to, or like right next to downtown campus.
most of EA is already here, and they've been here for a number of
There's
years.
a-
So they're
I
bringing
used to
the
live
whole
by
dog
the
and pony
EA.
show.
You'll buy the huge EA towers right next to the RDV complex.
You know, they shoot at the UCF stages downtown all the time. They
Yeah,
rent
did
those
not know,
stages.
actually.
Yeah, they've been here for quite a while. They just they haven't had the whole dog and pony show here, and now apparently they're going to bring the whole deal. So
That'll be
that
interesting.
would be a nice move for the local economics, for the industry that's here, that's trying to commit to living in Orlando full time. It's really hard to do, though. I remember years ago, I used to work about 6 months out of the year, and the other half of the year I was out of work. And you know, that's okay when you're a young guy and you know you're living in an apartment by yourself and you're just dating and having fun and going out and partying or whatever. But it's hard on raising a family and doing some of the adult things that you want to do as you get older. You can't work half of the year and then try to sustain yourself on 6 months worth of wages. So that's when I started going on the road a lot. And I went on the road for, gosh, the better part of 8 or 10 years, just going out of town, working seasonally in all of the popular markets around the country, and then coming back to Orlando for rest and relaxation, change my suitcase out and head out again on the next one. And I did that for a very long time as I watched the local industry kind of struggle to keep people busy. And ultimately it became impossible, especially at that point in my career where I had started doing bigger things. The big projects weren't coming to Florida anymore. And so if I was going to keep working in that echelon, I had to go someplace like Los Angeles. So that's when I decided to move. I would like to see the industry come back, though. It's really, it's an added incentive and a value added to your experience if you can, especially while you're in film school, go out and work on a commercial, go out and work on a low budget film once or twice a year while you're still in school and get that experience and add that to your educational experience you get in film school. It helps you, it strengthens your commitment, it strengthens your resolve, it builds your confidence, and it allows you to kind of enter the industry in stages as opposed to just kind of graduating from college and then sort of making a cold call at the front door of the industry and hoping for the best. You know, so on that level, I hope that the industry comes back to Orlando, but we'll see.
Do you think that the industry is focusing, like I just read an IndieWire article with Martin Scorsese about how he's kind of comparing the industry now to a content generator instead of like a really, you know, making good movies. It's just content like for streaming services like Disney Plus and HBO Max and whatever.
Well, those service providers that you are citing are among the more prestigious that actually throw some money at projects. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that's being made just to fill time.
I really don't kind of want to. Oh, sorry. I kind of really don't want to work in the industry. I know you're teaching a class that's very industry based. Do you see any like indie movements happening in the next couple of years?
Other than the ones that are happening now?
Yeah, I mean, there are some. I mean,
We've got
because
one
like
right
the
now.
big
A lot of
ones, there were big ones in Texas, you know, like with Linklater and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like
Teeth,
that.
Rooster Teeth's a pretty big one. They're a pretty big indie group, and they came out and their first show was a game.
What are you talking about? Sorry.
Rooster Teeth is less indie because they directly are operated by Lionsgate.
Yeah,
I don't know who Rooster Teeth is. I'm sorry.
Rooster Teeth was originally like an independent group founded by Bernie Burns, and their very first project, they took the original Halo game back in 2003 and made a web series about this group of simulation troopers in a box canyon in the middle of nowhere.
Man, I'm sorry. I'm not focused on film, bro. I'm not on the web track.
So
Here.
I'm familiar with Rooster Teeth. They basically used that success to fund several live action films. Recently, they've done a few live action short series, and recently they worked on animation such as Ruby, a HBO Max series called Genlock, and I think they did a Transformers series that was on Netflix recently.
Yeah, they've got one more season for that one. I've watched it. The last season was not as good as the first one, but I think the last one will be pretty good.
Yeah, but so what do you think about like a student who wants to go into indie instead of industry? What advice do you have for them, I guess?
Save your money,
Yeah, I know.
because you're not going to work very often. I'll tell you, you can attack the industry the way I did and go for the commercial industrial filmmaking complex, which will support you very well and allow you to have a life. Or if you want to be, if you really, I suppose, if you really want to be part of the indie movement, then you have to think locally and you have to think sustainably, the way I suppose you would in any other industry. And that is, you can't canvass the country looking for a community that already exists, because they tend to be very clandestine, very political, and very small. And there's not a lot of room for growth from the outside. What you might think about doing is what film school really is sort of designed for, which is build the Orlando community. If you really want to be part of the indie movement in that respect, then you might have to build your own community here and be a part of it here. Because the economics they're not very far reaching. So you guys got to stick together. And if you stick together, the likelihood of your success is far greater as a group than it is as an individual. That tends to be a very long-term investment of your time and dedication. It can be a very discouraging path to follow, because your successes are going to be, few and far between, and there's not going to be any apparent trajectory. They're going to come out of left field when they happen. So I ask students all the time what their idea of being in the industry is, because with the absence of a local independent market to sort of be a part of and to get your feet wet, the alternatives are corporate filmmaking, which is really almost nothing like, the Hollywood model. Or you got to move to a city where there's more stuff going on, like Atlanta or Los Angeles or New York. So it's tough. I mean, I don't really know how to answer that question effectively.
I mean, it doesn't feel like the industry is kind of seeking any more creative types, like in the
It
back then
never
you had
is.
like
It
the
never is.
I mean, back then you had like David Lynch and you had people like
You
George
have
Romero.
to make that happen for yourself. That's what, you guys hear some of your teachers harping on, being dedicated and working hard and doing your due diligence in film school. Those aren't platitudes, my friend. Those are simply the reactionary responses of teachers who hopefully have had some experience in the industry, and they can, at least from their point of view, tell you what it took for them to become involved.
Yeah, Stevenson.
I can tell you that, I was lucky, because in the old days in Orlando, I had my choice. I was in film school, and I kind of knew what was up. I had worked for a studio in New York, and I'd been a photographer and worked professionally, and I had a sense of the business, and I was able to kind of sniff it out a little bit. It was very clandestine here in those days as well, but I had a choice, right? So I could be in film school, or I could drop out and I could go right into the community and start doing work. I didn't have to pack my car and pack up my apartment and break up with my girlfriend and move across country. I didn't have to make those choices if I didn't want to. And so I was fortunate in that respect. And that's why I wish the industry would come here in earnest for you folks. So you had that kind of sort of stepping stone, because that was what gave me sort of the courage to drop out of film school and go to work right away and start learning my craft for real and moving my way up the ladder through the ranks. and do it before the industry kind of pulled stakes and went to the next place they were fascinated with, you know. That's why I say, you know, if you had the industry here again, if it were to come back, that would be such a benefit for you guys at this point in time. The closest you have now is Atlanta or Miami. I suppose you could go to Miami and try to work, but that's a little bit different market altogether than other places that I've worked in the country. And it's almost an absolute requirement that you be bilingual down in Miami, because there's a lot of work that comes in that is European work, non-union European work. It cruises under the radar. And there's a lot of different types of folks working on shows like that, to where you need to be a little bit more multicultural to blend in better down there. You could go to Atlanta. You know, there's a lot worse things than working in the industry writ large. You know, I mean, the fact that it's a big sort of slow moving, almost dinosaur in a way, that it sort of finds a place and roosts for a while and rummages around in the economics and makes a big splash and makes a lot of promises and then moves on. But you can benefit to a large extent by working in the actual industry, as opposed to seeking out, you know, a smaller, less economical model that is still gonna be prohibitive in the respect that you know, you'll probably have to maintain a part-time job doing something sustainable so that you can keep your bills paid. If you don't mind doing that, I would say start the community here. Be a part of a movement that rekindles a local industry here that might actually stay here. And then, you know, you have the benefit of being in on the ground floor on a brand new sort of local experience that you can share and nurture, and, you know, invite new people into the fold as they come out of college, and offer them something local and attractive that doesn't require that they change their life radically to stay involved. Otherwise, I'd say go to seek the highest ground you can find, and, you know, make it work. If you develop a reputation to where you're sought after for what you do, you can almost live anywhere and then work where the work goes if the folks that like to hire you are involved. So, you know, when I moved to LA, I thought I was going to be there for 3 to 5 years, and then I would, you know, move someplace that I really wanted to live, or maybe come back to Florida, and then just go out to LA when it was time to work. And I ended up being so busy that plan sort of went out the window, and I just stayed and worked and worked and worked and worked, because you can do that in a place like Los Angeles. You can just decide you want to work and work as much as you want, and take vacations when you want, and, you know, work when you want, because there's always something going on. But the flip side to that is, you know, if you establish yourself in a market like that, or even in Atlanta for that matter, if you had a reputation in Atlanta as a camera assistant or a lighting technician or an editor, you could feasibly live in Orlando and then just go to Atlanta when the work called you in. That's not out of the realm of possibility, I don't think. Given that Atlanta is only about 7.5 hours away, that's not a terrible commute. You know, you could come home on the weekends and work during the week, and, you know, do stuff like that. But the film industry is something that you have to sort of chase a little bit at a certain level. You have to kind of go where the work dictates that you go. It can be a little seasonal, and it can certainly be a little nomadic in the way that it sort of crops up here and there and everywhere, on location. And then understand that, you know, in small markets, the local community might have just enough work to keep the local group busy, and not a lot of work for outsiders. I remember I used to go to Wilmington, North Carolina, and work fairly frequently back in the old days. And Wilmington, North Carolina is a very small town. And the people that are there that work in the industry were very protective of what they had going on. They were very political. There was a lot of local politics, and it was also very Southern in a lot of ways. And I was a transplanted Yankee, they used to say. Even though I told them I was from Florida, technically I was a New Yorker. And, that was kind of, I was for a while, for a couple of years anyway, I was treated very much like an outsider until they got to know me and I became enough of a regular face there that they eventually accepted me. But that's how it is when you work on the road and you go places around the country and work in these small markets in these small towns. It's it takes a lot of getting used to. And you can do that, or you can, like I said, you can go to the mountain and try to make a go of it there. You can go on the road and work all over the country, or you can make it happen right here by being part of a new growing community.
Would you say to have like a backup degree, like a minor or like a backup job?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The thing about a college degree is it helps you when the other plans don't follow through, right? So I actually got injured and had my surgeries and things at a point in time where it was a little premature for me to actually retire, but I had to. So that was when my dropping out of college at 20 years old really turned around and bit me in the butt, because in order to be a teacher, they demand that you have certain credentials. And so I had to go back to college and get my credentials in order to continue teaching any place outside of a place like Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, I could teach all day long with my experience, and nobody thought any different. They never batted an eye at the fact that I was a practitioner teaching at City College in Culver City, for instance. But when you get outside of a market like that isn't educated in the ways of the industry and doesn't have the experience and the economics of the industry to fall back on, and you want to teach, you have to have your education. And so the degree will help you in the long run outside of your goals and aspirations for the film industry. You don't need a degree to be in the film business. But if you're not working in the business that will sustain you on your resume for job experience alone, if you got to get a corporate job, for instance, they're going to want you to have a degree. So what degree benefits you the most if you're going to go work in the media department at Florida Health, for instance? Well, a film degree might help, a business degree might help. An economics degree might help. Any bachelor's degree is going to help you get a corporate job, right? And it's interesting because even though the film industry is corporate, it's not based on academic achievement. It's based on yield by production, by manufacturing. And so you can have a degree, and that's great, but most of the degrees, even the film degrees that you get, to a large extent, don't really prepare you for the onslaught of working in the industry such that it is in a place like Los Angeles. You just have to go and immerse yourself in it and take your lumps. And if you survive, you can go far, and you can do it without a formal education if that's the way you want to play it. But the minute you step outside of that economic hayride, you better have something to fall back on. So when I came back to school, I didn't finish my film degree. I got an English degree. And then when I got my master's degree, I got a master's degree in writing. It's not in film. There's no industry outside of the film industry that cares whether or not you have a bachelor's degree in filmmaking or not, because they don't value it, and it doesn't help them in any way for you to be educated like that. They want you to have something that they can exploit, master's in business, bachelor's in, hospitality management or something like that, So yeah, I've always thought that, and I probably catch hell for being this honest, but I think
Yeah, UCF's looking at this like, oh no, don't say that.
a film degree might be an appropriate minor working under a major like journalism or, business administration or something, where you can temper your creative aspirations with something you can use out in the field. Or you can just commit to the idea and then do what it takes to make your education work in the vocation that you've chosen. And the best way to do that is to get to a town where there's enough going on, where you have a snowball's chance in hell of staying working at least 2/3 of the year, so that you can sustain yourself. I kind of like that model. It's kind of like Balboa burning the ships. You make a decision to be in the film industry, go all the way. Don't go in, don't dip your toe in. If you want to make movies, make movies. Because here's the thing, you can go to the big time and you can make somebody else's movies, studio movies, make a really terrific wage. Working in Hollywood is one of the few places left in the economics of the United States where a guy with absolutely no college education can make $45 an hour. Okay, you show me any other vocation where you can make that kind of money without having some craft training or being a part of a labor union like a plumbers union or the union of electrical workers, or maybe you're an industrial welder, and you can make a larger dollar amount per hour. All right, go and do that. Learn the craft, get a resume under your belt that people recognize, and then have your indie career, because you'll be more prepared for your indie career. You'll have more experience under your belt. You'll have some real big time filmmaking practical knowledge to serve you. And you can scale back your economics to a small independent filmmaking model in a smaller market once you have sort of earned your chops. And that's another possibility. That's something that is a very attractive plan of action for a lot of folks. Just go and get your work experience, your practical experience in a big market, take your lumps, earn some money, learn from some really talented people who are on their way up corporately speaking, in studio corporate model I'm talking about now. And then take that knowledge to a small community and start an indie movement in a small town. That's some pretty powerful medicine if you can make that work. And I saw that happen in places like Sacramento. Guys would work in Sacramento and they'd work 10, 15, 20 years and then they'd go back to their hometown and they'd move up to Northern California, go back to small town living and start a local network there and attract business. If the industry knows that there's a cohort of experienced people that live in a town like Orlando, they'll come down. They'll take a chance and come down. There used to be a big commercial industry in Orlando. It was seasonal, and when it was snowing up in New York, the production companies that made commercials would come down to Orlando, and they'd shoot from January to late April. And and then when it started getting warm back up north, they'd stop coming down and they would just work at home. And then we would have things going on down here. So we were fine where that, as far as that went. But they'll only come if they know that there are people that are experienced and they know what's going on. So you can't be self-taught and attract that kind of outside influence. But if you go to a big market and learn your trade and then come back, maybe you've got a union card or you've got a resume that indicates that you've been doing this for a long enough time that somebody can come down from a market like New York and trust a local crew to make their commercial for EA Sports or make their commercial for Gatorade or whatever it is they're doing down here, Chevy. and know that the quality of work and the workmanship that they can get in a small market like Orlando will be equal to what they would get if they were in their home market. And then they'll come. But you got to get that education, you've got to get that work experience that speaks of a higher understanding of what's going on than local self-taught processes and processes that don't reflect an understanding of the industry and how it works. Okay. And it's nice to be a theorist, and it's nice to take classes on directing and script writing and all of this stuff. That's wonderful. But if you want to work and earn a paycheck, they've already got a director. They've already got a writer. They want to come down here, say from New York, to get out of the snow. They don't want to come down here to make somebody else's movie in Orlando. They already know what they want. They're just coming down here for all of the supplementary talent that they need. Grips, electricians, camera assistants, teamsters. Okay. If you got that kind of work credential and that kind of experience, they will come and they will hire you. Okay. But nobody wants to come down so you can direct their $500,000 Chevy commercial. They've already got a guy for that. Okay. And that's the sort of the fallacy of any film program for that matter. They teach you, that you're going to graduate and be a director, and on what planet they got that information from is beyond me, because I have never seen that happen. Okay. Even Dave Nutter, who graduated from University of Miami with a degree in filmmaking, with a director's track and a director's focus in terms of what he studied, he worked as a executive assistant and a director's personal assistant for a number of years before he ever got an opportunity to do anything. Now he's doing well for himself. 40 years down the line, he's directing Game of Thrones. Okay. But he didn't graduate and start directing. It doesn't work that way. You need real skills. You need wrench turning skills that you can put to work as soon as you graduate, so you can start earning money doing films instead of earning money waiting tables or delivering pizzas, and then living vicariously through the 48-hour film festival and the local film festival, the Orlando Film Festival or whatever, right? Unless filmmaking is really just a very serious hobby for you. And if that's the case, then, you're fine. Okay. But we spend too much time. I got to get to the actual class content at some point. We spend too much time in our lifetime as human beings, sleeping, driving to work, going to the bathroom, eating. Okay. By the time we finally get down to how much of our life is actually spent doing a job, and then we realize that after we do all those other things that allow us to go to work and have a job, and then we spend time at that job, there's very little time left for anything else. Wouldn't you want the portion of your life dedicated to working and earning a living be doing something that you really love and enjoy, instead of doing something just to make money so that you can have a few hours in isolated moments here and there where you can do something that really excites you?
Basically capitalism.
I'm all about getting a job doing this thing, and the hell with the rest of it. The money will sort itself out eventually. You might work for $50 or $100 a day, but eventually the money will work itself out and you'll get better job offers. But I'm more about doing that than doing something else on the outside and moonlighting as a filmmaker. Having said that, we should probably talk about filters for a little while and chair this conversation for another time. It's a good conversation. I like having it with you folks because I don't want you to be scared about making a decision to be in the industry, but you really have to be practical about it. Okay. And you really have to You got to commit. Okay. Which is why, sometimes I find it frustrating when if I'm teaching face to face and I got a room full of 30 students and I'm looking out at that crowd and half of you guys are on your cell phones and I know you're not listening to me. I know you're on social media. I know you're on eBay buying that thing you saw, or you're on Facebook, right? And you're not spending those few moments we have together focusing on what's best for your future. And I know, and I look and I say, you know what? If you can't focus and dedicate yourself to something as simple as my lecture once a week, you're not going to make it in the film industry. You don't have a prayer, because you're going to get eaten alive by the people that would give everything to be involved. All right. And they're out there. They are out there, my friends. And you have to be as good or better than they are to get the opportunities. And having a half-assed commitment to being in the industry in the first place is not going to get you to square one, ever. Okay. That's why I say, go to the biggest market you can find. Test yourself there. Learn everything you can learn here in school. Get some solid experience, whatever you can get experience-wise under your belt while you're here. Make mistakes, that's okay. Do it here. And then equip yourself, steel yourself, and get your ass to a big market and test yourself. Because if you can get a toehold there and you can start working, you're going to get that snowball rolling and it's going to build and you're going to gain momentum and you will work and you will get recognized and you will perpetuate an income. All right. And you can make it happen. It's not that impossible. In fact, it's not impossible at all. It just takes a higher level of dedication than it takes to get a regular job. And that's hard enough right now as it is. So you got to work doubly hard if you want a job in an industry that everybody thinks is cool and would be fun to be involved in. Half of the people that are trying to get into the industry have no idea the level of sacrifice that it's going to take for them to get what they're really asking for. And they find that they don't want to invest that much time. They don't want to work that hard, or they don't want to, there's something about it that they just can't, fully commit to. So you got to be better than that. You got to be willing to do whatever it takes. Right. And then, you can make it happen. And it's worth it. It really is. Because at the end of the day, you can spend 30 years selling insurance or working at Jiffy Lube or flipping burgers, or you can spend 30 years making movies. And if they don't happen to be your movies, who cares? They were still movies, and they might even be movies that end up, in the theaters, and, you got some great experience and some good stories to talk about, and you made a hell of a living in the process, that's, the business for me. It has to work for you as a business. Just making movies and calling yourself a filmmaker, that's fine. But I also want to pay my rent or my mortgage. And I also want to make a car payment. I want to earn paychecks being a grip, paychecks lighting films, paychecks shooting commercials, because that's the real game anyway. So you guys can do it. I didn't have anybody in the industry. My parents weren't in the film industry. I didn't have a brother in the industry. I was nobody. I worked on the East Coast till I built up a strong enough resume to where I could go out to LA and fight in that schoolyard, pick the biggest bully I could find and punch him right in the mouth and say, I'm here to work, and get out there and do it. And just have a little bit of fight and incentive to go out there, because it's, you're going to test yourself. You're going to do things you never thought were possible until you get pushed hard enough and you want something bad enough. And then you're going to do amazing things, and you're going to see people do amazing things. And it really is kind of a rush. It can be a lot of fun, and it can do a lot for your morale to be around a community that thinks like that and moves like that, behaves like that. Especially for the young folks. If you really get off on talking about films and talking about, having conversations about, obscure auteur directors and stuff, imagine being out on a dinner date and having the table next to you guys talking all about Tarkovsky You know, they could be talking about the Daytona 500 or what they did on spring break, or they could be talking shop, you know, and it's kind of neat when you're in a restaurant and you can overhear people talking shop. You know, you're in the right place at that point, especially if it's, you know, just some old pizza restaurant or, you know, Mexican joint or Italian joint, you know. It's really neat. It's intoxicating, actually. You should do it. You should really do it. It's one hell of an adventure. Don't downplay the possibility of working in the industry, you know. There's no nobility in poverty, guys. You know, might as well earn a living while you're doing this. Shall we talk about filters now so I don't bore you people completely to tears? All right, let's look at my presentation here. Let's do that for a little while and see how you feel about it. I'm open to having this conversation again with you guys if you want to have it, or if you want to have it on an individual basis, if you got particular things you're worried about. I'll never lie to you. I'll always tell you the truth. I'll shoot straight with you. You know, I got nothing to lose by doing it. And I would love nothing more than to watch you folks succeed. Because, you know, when I was your age, if somebody told me I couldn't do something, I'd be like, the hell with that. I'm going to go do it right now. You know, it's just that kind of individual, you know, so you got to have a little bit of that. You got to develop a little bit of that. And then you'll be fine. But I want to talk to you now a little bit about this boring topic of filters. It's not really boring, actually. I think this is a pretty creative thing you can do. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the types of filters that we've got, how they fit on the camera, the styles, what they do in terms of their effect. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about matte boxes. I've got a few different matte boxes here to show you. And then I'll let you go. Okay, so this will take about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 20. Okay, filtration for video. Filters are used in the moment that you create your images or your video clips, okay? They offer instant results that we call baked into an image, okay? There's a lot that you can do to your image in post-production that will offer some form of an effect, a color effect, a CGI effect. We have now digital filters from Tiffin. They have a very interesting DX digital film plugin for things like Premiere and for Final Cut. But some of this you want to do in camera, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I have a 5-part series on filters that I already have on YouTube. I get into a lot of detail, so I get really deep in the weeds about filters and how you can put them on cameras and all the different kinds. If you want to watch that, it's not required, and it's certainly not mandatory for you to pass any quiz that I would give you on this information. But if you want, you know, a little bit of extra information or some extra details about this, you can go to these websites. Now, I've put them on your web courses videos page. After the 6 that I have for this section that you need to look at and study, these 5 are listed after that, and you can go to YouTube and check them out if you want. But again, it's not mandatory. It's just for extra information. Okay, so filters are generally glass accessories, although some of these are resin that I'm going to show you today. They're optically clear, and then they have some kind of an effect built into them. They are either round with a threaded rim, like this skylight filter that I have, or this UV filter I have right here. Okay, they've got a metal threaded rim, and they screw right onto the front of your lens. Here's a, should be 77. Here's a Tokina lens, and here's my UV filter. They just screw right on the front of the lens, right? And they attach like so, okay? Or we use gelled Gelatin filters, which I'll show you, or cut glass filters, which I also have some samples of here. Whatever style you choose, there's a method of connectivity that's involved that'll marry that filter to the front of your lens so you can shoot through it and get the effect that you want. I have a video here. This is on web courses. It is the the CEO and founder of the Tiffin Filter Company. When I was a young camera assistant, we used Tiffin cut glass filters all the time. I still use some of the Tiffin cut glass filters. This brand has been around for a long time. It's a trusted brand. And Ira Tiffin started the Tiffin company, I think it was in the 50s, and started making filters for cinema cameras. You might recognize the Tiffin name if you have an interest in Steadicams, because Tiffin is, oddly enough, a filter company, but they're also the North American distributor for Steadicam. And I think they might be global by now, I'm not sure. So if you license a Steadicam, if you buy a Steadicam rig brand new, you're going to deal with Tiffin out in LA when you buy it. So Tiffin's an interesting company. Okay. And Ira Tiffin has a little interview here. He talks about his favorite filters and the 5 filters he thinks are critical for videography and cinematography in the current digital world. So check it out. It's, I think, like 15, maybe 20 minutes, and it's on web courses for you. Okay. The styles of filters I'm going to show you today are threaded rounds. That's what this guy is. It's a threaded round filter. Drop-in filters. We call them series filters. Kodak Ratin gel filters, resin filters, and cut glass filters. So the variety of threaded rounds, they range in a standard set of sizes from 37 millimeters up to, in prosumer, 82 millimeters. Okay, but I had a couple of lenses in here last week that I told you were 114 millimeter accessory size, meaning 114 millimeters across the objective, across the front element. Okay, so the millimeter accessory size and the millimeter of your focal length are 2 different things. They're both dimensions, but one is telling you what I'm all tongue-tied right now. What diameter of filter you need on the front of your lens, and the other is telling you the focal length of the point of convergence to your image plane, and that's a different dimension altogether. Don't be confused. But there's some standard sizing that you'll hear and start to recognize, and you'll realize that they're different than focal length millimeter dimensions, which you'll hear in context to a discussion about lenses. So you'll start to be able to hear the difference between whether somebody's talking about a filter or a lens just by the size they're talking about. Okay. If you're using threaded filters, you're going to run into a conundrum, and that's going to be if you have a whole box of lenses. Let's say you like to use some vintage lenses on your digital video camera. So you might have, what have I got over here? You might have, say, for instance, an Olympus 50 millimeter lens. They're 51/8, and the Olympus Nifty 50. That's kind of popular in a lot of the little indie film video magazines. This has a 49 millimeter accessory size. Okay. And I know that it's 49, not because it's written on the lens anywhere, because Olympus doesn't always put their accessory sizes, at least on their vintage lenses. But on the inside of the lens cap, you might be able to see that there's a 49 millimeter molded right into the cap of the plastic cap. That's how I know what the accessory size is. So I might have a lens that's 49 millimeter accessory size. And then let's say I've got this Tokina 11-16 here, which is 77 mil, okay, accessory size. In the case of the Tokina, let's see if they're putting their lens size on here. Yeah, on the bottom of the barrel on the Tokina, you can see there's a circle with a slash and a 77. That's the accessory size of this lens. If it's not there, it's on the inside of the Tokina cap as well. You can see 77 millimeter in there. Okay, oops, that's upside down. 77 millimeter. Okay, so right off the bat, I got 2 different lenses with 2 different accessory sizes. If I'm buying threaded round filters, I'm going to have, if I want to get a polarizer, let's say, I got to get one in 77. Then I got what? I got to get one in 49 as well. Well, you could do that, but it's going to start getting expensive. The thing about threaded round filters is they can be easily adapted, and we use something called a step-up ring. and I got some here. This is a whole nest of step-up rings. And what you can see is it's from one size to the next size larger, and it just keeps going up and up and up the food chain until you go from, in this case, this nest of step-up rings goes from 49 millimeter at its smallest up to 82 millimeter at its largest. Okay, and here's 77 to 82. Okay, so what you might consider doing is just getting the 77 millimeter filter that covers your largest lens, and then get a step down ring that goes, it might be a series of step down rings, mind you, that go from 49 to 77. And you could do that in this nest of filters right here. You could keep it all screwed together, and it's going to look a little wonky, but you can do it. You can go all the way. You can make a 49 millimeter lens accept a 77 millimeter filter by using a series of step-up rings. Okay, you can do it. Like if you were shooting with, I like to use these old vintage Olympus lenses on the, like the Blackmagic Pocket camera, because they have a really interesting complementary look when you mix this lens formulation with this capture device. You can get a really nice image that comes out looking like old vintage 16 millimeter film. And so I might end up with a whole bunch of lenses that have 49 millimeter accessory sizes. And if I don't have 49 millimeter threaded rounds, I got to use my 77s and step them down. Now, it just so happens that because folks started doing this on a fairly regular basis, the manufacturers that make these stepping rings started making big steps. So it's now possible to get one ring that goes from 49 on the inside to 77 on the outside. Looks like a big black donut. And it's possible. In fact, I might have one in my bag here. I got a whole bunch of extra sizes here. Here's 52 to 77. So the inside diameter is 52 millimeter and the outside diameter is 77. Right? So all I would need is a 49 to 52 ring, and I could do that jump in 2 moves. And so I would have, you know, that filter adapted. Instead of using the whole nest, I can just take the 49 to 52 part and marry that to the 52 to 77, like so. And now I can put my 77 millimeter filter on the front of my 49 millimeter lens. So there's lots of different ways to skin that cat. I like to have a couple of varieties of stepping rings in my AKS bag at all times, so I can adapt these threaded rounds if that's what I'm using. And it pays off in the long run, carrying all those extra gimmicks. I keep them in a little bag like this. So I've got maybe, 30 step-up rings in this little bag I got from, I think, Home Depot or something. But it's just for that very purpose. So threaded rounds are kind of logistically a little bit of a pain because of all the different sizes of filters you're going to come in contact with and different accessory sizes. But that's why a company like Rokinon makes all of their lenses in their system the same accessory size, so that you're not worried about, wide lenses having one measurement and standard lenses having a different measurement and telephotos having another measurement altogether. They make everything uniform. So uniform fronts, we call it. And that adds a little cost overall to the equipment, but it makes it easier in the long run for you to work with that gear if you don't have to swap rings on and off all the time and worry about whether or not your 50 millimeter lens has the same filter size as your 135 or as your 18 mil, right? So consider that. The reason why cut glass filters were sort of devised was to help us avoid that very complicated situation. I'm going to show you the cut glass filters in a minute, but before I do, I want to show you things like the series filters. Series filters work with accessory rings similar to the step-up rings, but it's one size for your lens accessory, and then it's a split ring. And if you unscrew the two parts, you take a series filter, series 6, series 9, 72 or 77 millimeters, drop that into the filter holder and screw the two parts together. And that's how the filter attaches to the front of your lens. It's kind of an out of date, out of fashion way of adapting filters to the lenses. It was more popular in the days when we were using collapsible rubber lens hoods on the front of our Ingenue Zooms, for instance. But now that we have matte boxes, we're using the cut glass. The cut glass have kind of become the standard for the industry. Gelatin filters were among the first that were developed by this guy Frederick Gelatin in the UK in the early turn of the last century. Around 1912, Kodak bought the Gelatin photographic company in the UK. And when they bought the company from Fred Gelatin, they also bought the technology to make the gelatin filters, which look like these. So the Kodak Gelatin gels were the kind of gels that we used with the film cameras. And specifically, I can remember as a young camera assistant having to pull out the Gelatin gel, which is a really thin vellum that it's made with a color correct dye. And it's like clear plastic, but you'll have a filter holder, kind of like what you see here on the screen. This is a filter holder, I think, for a Bolex or an Arri 16 millimeter camera. And you cut out enough of that Gelatin filter to fit inside the filter holder, and then that'll fit into a slot in the camera. On the Panaflex camera, on the film cameras, 35 millimeter, there was a slot. If you can see this red arrow, it's pointing to a little door behind the focus assist. So you had to kind of flip that door open with your fingernail, and there was a filter holder in there. You pull it out, and it was a long curved filter holder. At the very end was a little square window, just like the filter holder you see here. And we'd have to cut out the Gelatin gel to fit inside the window of that filter holder, and then insert it into this slot. And basically, it would insert it all the way into the optical path right behind where the lens is attached to the camera at the lens port. So this is the lens port right here, okay? And the filter slot, it was a long filter holder, about that long, with a little window at the end and a little handle at this end, and you would slip it right into that slot, and when it go right in deep into the camera, right behind the lens. So you'd have your lens mounted to the Panavision like that, and then you'd have the gate where the film's traveling through, and then you'd have your filter slot would go right in between, just like that. And so we used that slot for basic color correction Gelatin gels, only the color correction stuff, not the effects filters. So you get a Gelatin gel like this. These two right here are neutral density gels, and I'll explain what neutral density gels are in a few minutes. This is an N6, ND6, and an ND 1.0. And these are designed to help reduce the amount of light coming through the port, through the lens, and striking the film, and helping you balance and control exposure by, in essence, making the image slightly darker with no color bias at all. Okay, it's like putting sunglasses on the lens of the camera. Okay, also, if we had a film stock loaded into the camera, for instance, if we were shooting on stage and we were using artificial lights, the artificial lights had a color balance to them, and they were slightly orange in color, and their color output was measured at 3200 degrees Kelvin, okay, which is a bright orange flavor. If we had film loaded in the camera that was sensitive to the artificial light, to the 3200 degrees Kelvin, the images that we could create would be neutral in color. They wouldn't have a color bias to them. But if we took that camera loaded with that tungsten film, we called it, for the tungsten lights we were using, if we took the camera outside with the tungsten film in it and took pictures outside the soundstage, everything would have a blue cast to it, because the daylight would appear bluer to a film stock that was balanced towards the orange light that came out of our studio fixtures. So in order for us to use the same film we were shooting on stage outside, we'd have to put an orange filter on the front of the lens, or put an orange Gelatin gel in this gel holder in the Panaflex. Okay. And vice versa. If we were shooting outside most of the day and we had, you know, some film left on the reel in the camera and we wanted to go inside and start shooting inside, we could put a rat and blue filter in the camera that would color correct the daylight balanced film stock to be able to work under the orange incandescent lighting. It's not a favorable solution in that case because the blue gel is very dark and you have to make major exposure corrections to accommodate that blue gel. But it's possible and you can do it. And we would use the rat and gels and put them in the camera with the filter holders that were in the optical path, we call it. So the Ratten filters came in a series of blue filters for color correction, daylight to incandescent lighting, and then a series of pale orange filters that would correct incandescent light to daylight. Okay. And then a few ambers that were simply for warming effect, and then amber mixed with neutral density, which we have here. I want to talk to you about neutral density in a few minutes. So Ratten filters are the oldest style of filters. They're gel filters, and they're kind of a pain in the butt to deal with, and they only come in color corrective solutions, okay? Some of the other filters that are available now that we can take advantage of have some interesting effects that you can achieve in camera, like smearing effects, diffusion effects, multi-image effects, close-up effects. There's a number of other features of the filter method that you could take advantage of if you go with either threaded rounds or cut glass filters. Kochen filters are an interesting solution that came around in the late 70s, early 80s maybe. I remember when Kochen filters came out. And the interesting thing about Kochen filters is they're kind of an odd mix between a threaded round filter and a cut glass filter. They're made out of optical resin. And I've got a few of them here I can show you. For instance, here is a color corrective Kochen resin filter. This is an 85B, so this will correct incandescent film stock to be shot outside under daylight. You can see it's kind of orange, right? If I hold up a white card, you can see the color bias of the filter. Okay, it's about I don't know, this one's kind of thin. It's maybe a 1/16 of an inch thick, not very thick. It's made out of resin, but it's optically clear resin. So yes, it's a form of plastic, but it's a very high grade of plastic that you could shoot through, and it wouldn't distort or soften your detail. And so the Kochen filters are designed to work with this holder system. And you can see here on my little presentation, you need an adapter ring, which goes into the filter holder on the back side. It just kind of snaps in place. And this one happens to be, I think this is a 77 millimeter adapter ring. So it's designed to thread onto the front of a lens with a 77 mil accessory size. They have smaller ones for smaller lenses, but this is the holding system that you're going to use. And the gel just kind of slips into these little slots here. That's a tongue twister for you. It slips into the little slots like so. And it works a lot like the cut glass filters work in our matte boxes. Okay, so that's just on there. And if you had your lens on your camera, it would just thread on and fit like so. Okay, and now you've got a filter system in place, and you can swap them out just by pulling them out of the slots and replacing them with whatever you want, color correction or effect or diffusion, whatever. I've even got a polarizer here. In the very back slot of these filter holders, you can put a round filter like a polarizer. And if you know how polarizers work, like if you have polarized sunglasses, you know that as you turn your polarized sunglasses, you can see the effect come on and come off what you're looking at. And so you have to turn the polarizing filter as well. So the polarizers are round and they fit into the back slot of this filter holder. And you can turn the polarizer in the filter holder, you see my lens getting darker and brighter through the filter. So that's the polarizing effect taking place. You can kind of see it. Okay, so even the polarizers will work in the Koken system. I like these because they're fairly inexpensive. You used to be able to buy the filter holder, and it would come with one step-up ring. So you would buy the starter kit with one of the major sizes, one of the common sizes. The common sizes were 52, 62, 72, 77, okay, and maybe 49. So you'd get a ring, you'd get a filter holder, and then you would get the Tiffin, Tiffin. You'd get the Koken catalog, which looked like this, and inside were all of the different filters and a basic representation of what the effect would be. And then you could, sort of use this to determine what your next filter purchase was going to be. I don't think they print this catalog anymore, but the whole catalog is now online at Koken.com, and you can see all the different filters and what they do on the Koken website. And you can still buy the Koken starter kits. They sell them at B&H Photo out of New York, Adorama, places like that. And what's nice is you've only got to really have one, maybe two filter holders, because you can stack them, they click together. This filter holder holds 3 standard square filters and then one round adjustable filter. So it'll hold up to 4 filters at a time. So you really need 1 or 2 of these. And then you get a selection of rings to fit all the different lens sizes that you have. And then you get 1 set of filters. You don't have to have all the different sizes. You just get 1 set of whatever it is you're interested in. So this happens to be an 85 filter. I've only got to buy 1 of those. Only got to buy 1 polarizer, right? Kind of like the way cut glass filters works. The reason why we have these cut filters like this is so that we can buy 1 set of filters and then just adapt with rings and a holder and save a lot of money. And these Koken filters are only about, I don't know, maybe $20 or $30 a piece, and you can get them in sets on Amazon and eBay even cheaper. The ones that are coming out of China are pretty much just as good as the French filters. These are made in France. The Koken ones are made in France. And with the exception of some of the more obscure filters that only Koken makes, you can get the basic stuff in a nice kit, in a Chinese company for, $30 or $40 and get maybe a dozen filters and a holder, and you'll be well on your way to a filter collection that's pretty flexible and pretty fun to use and not real expensive. The alternative to that is to go with the professional stuff, which are the cut glass filters. And one of the biggest drawbacks of the cut glass filters is that they're notoriously expensive. So I've got an assortment of maybe, I don't know, I got about 2 dozen of these things. Polarizers, neutral density filters, color filters for correction, color graduated filters for effects, a number of different styles and functions. And they range in price anywhere from about the cheapest filter I have in my assortment right now is the optically clear filter, which we call an optical flat. And that is basically designed just for protecting the front of the lens. It's just a square piece of optically clear glass. And it looks like this. It's about 3/16 of an inch thick. And it's optically clear, so you can shoot through it without any distortion or loss in detail. Okay, if you look in the upper corner, it says Tiffin Clear USA. So that is what we call an optical flat. And what we would use these for would be if we had like a special effects or a stunt shot that we had to do where there was going to be a lot of flying debris. And what we would do is obviously make sure your filter is clean. I got fingerprints all over mine because I've been using it to lecture with. You take your filter and put it in the matte box, and it would protect the camera from flying debris. So I take out my filter stage from my matte box, and there's a little sort of spring-loaded lever with a little grabber there, and there's a series of little feet. Take that filter and just sort of line it up on the bottom, and then pull up on that little lever that kind of locks the filter into the filtered holder. And then I insert that into the matte box. And what I have is a clear protective barrier between my cinema lens and whatever flies into the matte box from an explosion or a stunt or something. So a lot of times when we were having ordnance on set, especially if it was inside, if the special effects guys were going to blow something up, which happened a lot on certain TV shows I used to work on, we'd put the optical flats in the matte boxes so we didn't damage the lenses that we were renting from Panavision. Okay. This filter in 4x4 inch size costs about 120 bucks. But some of the lenses that we were using were worth as much as $10,000 or $15,000 a piece. So we'd much rather break an optical flat for $100 than ruin the front element of a $10,000 cinema lens that would have to be repaired. So we'd use it for stuff like that, stunts, car chases where we'd have a camera on the side of the road and the cars go racing by and they kick up a lot of gravel and sticks and stones and crap off the surface of the road. Some of them can fly into the matte box and crack or chip the lens. So we put the optical flat in there for stuff like that, car crashes and things like that. So it's just a good sort of all-purpose filter. You could also make interesting effects with the optical flat. Sometimes if we had a shot where we wanted just a little bit of diffusion, you can use Vaseline on an optical flat and create a diffusion effect, which is very interesting because you can kind of put the effect wherever you want in the frame. So as you're looking through the lens at your image, if you just wanted a certain spot in the image frame to be sort of blurry or out of focus, you could apply a little bit of Vaseline, have the operator look through the lens and direct your finger to the spot, and then just dab the front of the optical flat with some Vaseline and get a topical diffusion effect out of it. So there's lots of stuff you can do with an optical flat. It's a good utility filter to have in your filter box. The ones you can see in this picture right here are what we call color grads. And they might have names like this one in the extreme foreground here looks like it's a deep gray grad. That's designed for a particular kind of effect outside. We got sunset graduated filters here. So this is a deep purple and pink sunset grad. And you can see here we got a warm orange and yellow sunset grad. This is a coral filter here in the bottom left of frame. In the back, we got a couple of what you might call tobacco or sepia filters or chocolate, they're sometimes referred to. And those will give you that kind of old-timey color look, like the beginning of The Godfather 2, where everything kind of had that sepia look to it. Sometimes those effects are done in camera as opposed to doing them in post-production, because post-production color correction can get kind of expensive. On a major motion picture, it can be as expensive as $400 an hour to have a colorist working with you to do a basic color effect that you could do very easily in camera with a filter. So sometimes it makes a lot of sense to bake the color into the image if you know it's definitely something, a decision that you've made with the director and you guys are going to stick to that decision and it's not going to change. If you're worried about changing your mind about what something's going to look like, then you can do what seems to be the commonplace in the industry these days, which is to shoot everything neutral, don't do anything in camera, and then make all your decisions in post. The drawback there is you might not be in the same frame of mind that you were on the day that you were shooting the image in the first place. And so rather than being inspired and jazzed up with adrenaline and emotion about what you see in front of the camera and the performances that you're getting from the actors, and you might be sitting in an editing room 6 weeks later, you know, with a headache and a cup of coffee, and it's 7 o'clock in the morning, and you're just not feeling it. And so the choice that you'll make at that point would be probably very different than the creative choice you would have made on the day that you shot the images in the first place. So that's why I kind of like doing things in camera, because you can make that commitment, make it now. If you're inspired to do something, that's really kind of what we got into this for in the first place, which is to follow our inspiration and do the creative things, make the creative choices that we're driven to make. And so in these moments of intense activity on set where everything's coming together and you're just feeling that vibe, if you have an instinct that says use a filter to do this effect, that it's going to really contribute to the story in some significant way, I think there's no better time to do it than right in that moment when your heart says do it, you know, because later you might chicken out, you know, 6 weeks later, you might say, I don't know if I really want to do that anymore. I'm not feeling it, you know? And then that moment is lost. And then maybe your movie is not as good. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it's, you know, could be all in my head that I'm thinking this way, but I like to do things in camera as much as possible.
Wouldn't it be also be a lot more expensive as well?
Yeah, in post-production, everything is more expensive because now you're hiring a specialist to work with software and spend a lot of time making adjustments that you could have made on the fly, almost at no charge and no expenditure of time or thought process, because you're there in the moment already. All the gear's been rented. It's sitting on the floor right in front of you. The set's right there. The actors are there. The crew is here. Everybody's ready and waiting for you to tell them what to do. And then you don't do it. You wait till later when you got one guy in a dark room and everything has to be done artificially at $400 an hour. I'd rather bake it in camera. You know, and I'm not necessarily talking about radical choices, but certainly something as, you know, as simple as using a colored grad to enhance the color of a sky. You know, if you get a washed out sky, the filter right in the middle of this frame right here is called a Paradise Blue Grad filter. I've got one here somewhere. And you can use it to make a sky a little bit bluer. So let's say, you know how you can take a mirrorless camera or a DSLR, and because they have such narrow dynamic range, a lot of times you shoot outside and everything in the foreground is properly exposed, but you have some sky in the shot and it's just all blown out to white because the value is just too hot for that exposure that is accommodating the foreground. Well, then you got to make a choice. Is the sky more important than the foreground? And so you close down your aperture on your lens, you make the sky darker so it appears bluer, but then everything in the foreground just got really notably darker, right? Well, instead of doing that, you could take a Paradise Blue Grad. This is a Paradise Blue #1 from Schneider. And you can make just the top of your frame blue. This is very subtle. They come in different grades. So this is a #1, very, very subtle. It's clear on the bottom and blue on the top. Can you get a sense of that? Okay. So if your sky is blown out to white, maybe it's going to take a Paradise Grad #2 or #3. The density of a #3 is notably darker. I've got a coral #3 here. I'll show you the difference. A coral #3 makes the shot look like it's happening at sunset. And this can be used at any time during the day. Here's a density 3. I need my white card. A density 3 coral grad. You see how much deeper the color is? The top of the filter. Okay. So this is a triple density filter. So this would make your sky nice and kind of salmon colored, like sunset. If you get a #3 density in the Paradise Blue, it'll really make your sky nice and blue. And you don't have to worry about that blown out narrow dynamic range. Go ahead and shoot it. Now, you got to be careful with a grad filter because anything that's in the foreground that's biting into the sky is going to fall under the effect of the graduate filter. So you can't use it for every kind of shot that you might anticipate. But if it's a wide shot of establishing shot, let's say, of some people at the beach, and everybody that's in the shot is in the foreground, and there's a definite horizon line and nobody is passing it, and the sky is all blown out on top. Put that grad down in there and you can totally fix that shot. And that's something you can do in camera, and then you don't have to do it later at a you know, at a much more expensive rate in post. So those are grad filters. These are ND filters, and this one is a really dense ND filter because it's for a digital cinema camera. This is a set of matched ND filters for a Panavision digital camera. And they have everything from a one-stop exposure reduction all the way down to, I think, a six-stop exposure reduction. There's a lot of filters. Here's a 6x6 cut glass filter. I use the 4x4-inch cut glass filters for the digital work that I do. If I was going to shoot with anamorphics, like I have a plan to buy a set of anamorphic lenses this year, and if I do that, I'm going to have to go to a wider filter, which is 4 by 5.65, which is the standard size for Panavision cut glass filters. I have a matte box that'll hold that size, and I'll have to put away my 4x4s and move over to my 4x5.65s so I can shoot with 1.33 anamorphics. So that's okay. An ND filter in 4x4 inches though ran me about this was about 250, 300 bucks for this Tiffin cut glass. So the 4x5.65s are going to cost a pretty penny, between $300 and $400 a piece. So
are there any type of filters that get rid of that kind of digital sharpness that DSLRs have?
yeah,
I know we
diffusion filters.
live in a time with digital cinematography, and I know you grew up in a time probably with analog film. I personally love. But is there any filters? Because I know you can see that video type quality in a lot of DSLR footage.
Man, film is sharp too. I mean, especially if you nail the focus, and if you're shooting at a deep stop like 4, 5, 6, or an 8, inside with a lot of light or outside, film is over sharp too. And so we would use diffusion filters all the time, especially on close-ups of the female actors, right? Just to soften the image up and smooth out the makeup and remove things like, you know, some people have a complexion where they have big pores, and on a close-up you can really see that. And on a digital close-up with this high resolution, all of the flaws in somebody's complexion are laid bare for the audience if you don't do something about it. So yes, diffusion filters are high on the list of filters that you must do in camera, because the digital diffusion effects that are available are not as good. They have a tendency to look artificial and inorganic. So diffusion is one of the effects that you definitely want to do in camera on the day. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about diffusion filters in a minute, but I got to get you there by way of the matte box. So here's the Ursa Mini, like what you guys have at school. And this is a Croziel matte box he has on the front of this Ursa Mini. You guys have the ones that are similar to the guys that I use. This is a Schneider matte box. I got these matte boxes about, about 16, 17 years ago. And they've been with me ever since. I've got 2 of these, and they've been very durable and very reliable. I paid about 1,200 bucks a piece for these 17 years ago, right? On the flip side, I bought this Camvate or K-Vision. This is a Canadian matte box, K-Vision. This is the one that holds my 4x5.65 filters. And I paid 150 bucks for this one. So go figure. I don't know. Is this one as durable as the Schneider? I don't think so. It's still, it has a plasticky feel to it that this one just doesn't have. This one feels like a bomb-proof matte box. And it's a very good matte box, but it's a certain kind of matte box, and this is a certain kind of matte box. And it's all about the right tool for the right job. This matte box only holds 4x4 filters. This one will hold my anamorphic filters. This matte box will also fit on a 114 millimeter Cinema Prime, like the zines that I frequently get from UCF. And so this matte box has to be used when I shoot with zines or shoot with anamorphic lenses and anamorphic filters. Okay. There's lots of different kinds of boxes, and sometimes it's fun to own this stuff, and sometimes it's better to rent this stuff because of the number of options and variations that exist. Okay. Now, I used to shoot for a living, and so anything that I own, I used to rent to my clients. So they could either rent matte boxes from me, or they could rent matte boxes from the camera rental house. And it didn't matter to them. They didn't care who they rented it from, as long as they rented what I needed to shoot their commercial, let's say. And if I happen to be the one who had it, it's the same money one way or the other. And in fact, a lot of times what I would do is, in order to avoid any uncomfortable discussions of conflict of interest, let's say, I would say to the client, look, you know, I have the same matte boxes, I have the same filters as you're going to get from Panavision or from Band Pro or from HD Video Pro, but I'll give you a 15% discount on the price, and they won't. So I'll give you the discount as an incentive to go ahead and rent my kit from me, and then we'll just get from the vendor what we need that I don't own, the camera or the lenses or whatever it is. And that was a good way for me to make a little extra money too in the process. This is a clip-on matte box. This is a rod bed matte box. You see the difference? You see this little rod adapter on the bottom of this guy? So you see I've got the GH5 over here with another one of the Schneider matte boxes mounted to the rods. And it's also mounted to the front of the lens with a little adapter. So on the back side of this matte box, if I loosen that dog latch, there's a cowling. It's a reducer. The native size of this matte box is 95 millimeters, which is another standard size for cinema primes. Cinema primes come in 114 front, 95 mil front, 85 mil front, and sometimes 82 mil front. Okay. This one happens to be a 95 mil matte box. If I had, for instance, the, what's 95? The Sigma cinema zooms are 95 mil front. So if I had a Sigma 18 to 35 cinema zoom, not the photographic zoom, not this one. Well, where is it? I got it around here somewhere. Not the photo lens, the cinema zoom is 95 mil front. And this matte box goes right on the front, and I just take this adapter out. But if I'm going to use this for my DZO 20 to 70, that's only a 77 mil threaded accessory. So I take the 95 to 82, and then the 82 to 77 step up, and I put it in the back of that matte box, lock the dog down, and now this will screw to the front of the lens and simultaneously mount to the rods. Okay. And what you get when you do that with a matte box is, like I showed you the other day with the Ursa Mini, when I had the K-Vision matte box on the Ursa Mini with the Zine lens. You end up with a very stable and sturdy method of mounting your camera and your matte box together to where you can hold it any way you have to hold it in the heat of battle and not worry about, you know, the thing coming apart on you. And I really like that as a confidence builder when I'm shooting, because I don't have to worry about things coming flying off this camera if I'm moving around doing stuff really quick, especially running around handheld following the action. Okay, so it's nice to have it mounted here and here, but not all matte boxes work that way. So this little guy that I just showed you, the clip-on, we call it, that mounts only to the front of the lens. So this has an adapter ring that is 82 native, and then I got an 82 to 77 step-up ring on there. And it pops into the back of this matte box like so, and you tighten down this little locking knob. And now this will mount, you see there's no rod adapter on it. This will thread directly onto the lens that I'm shooting with, but there's nothing supporting this matte box. So if I were to grab the camera by this matte box, I could probably rip the whole matte box right off the front of the camera if I wasn't careful. Okay, so this is something that I would only use in a Steadicam setup, let's say. So let's say I had a camera, a small camera like an Arri Alexa Mini or a Z camera or even a DSLR. This is a GH4, okay, with a wide angle lens on. If I was going to mount this on the Steadicam, in order to keep this as light as possible, you're picking a small prime lens to go on the Steadicam, a small camera, and then maybe a clip-on matte box to keep the weight down, okay, and then mount this on the Steadicam. We do that all the time for any of the stabilizer shots we had to do, because if you put your camera, even this guy, well, this might not be too bad on the Steadicam, but the Ursa Mini on the Steadicam, for instance, on my Steadicam, the Ursa Mini with a cinema zoom and a matte box and a Anton Bauer battery and the viewfinder, that comes within 3 to 5 pounds of maxing out my arm on my Steadicam. My Steadicam has a 35-pound arm or 36-pound arm. Okay, so that's the payload of my Steadicam, 36 pounds. So if the camera weighs more than that, the arm bottoms out and you don't get that floaty, stabilized effect anymore. It's just bouncing off the bottom of the arm, bang, bang, bang. And you might as well be handheld at that point because you're getting the same amount of jerky motion. All right. So a lot of times we'll strip these cameras down as far as we can go. And that includes removing things like, the rod base, maybe the EVF. I have low profile Anton Bauer batteries for Steadicam work. So they're about half the size of a normal Anton Bauer battery, just for the situations where you're on the Steadicam. So you can keep the weight as low as possible. And then instead of having a cinema zoom on the camera, when you go to Steadicam, you probably go to a cinema prime, and you'll go to something like a 35 mil cinema prime, which tends to be kind of perfect for the Steadicam at 4 to 5 feet away. As you're following somebody, 35 millimeter lens tends to be exactly the right lens for, 35 millimeter film or a super 35 millimeter sensor like what you have in the Ursa Mini. So we'll put a prime lens on because, a prime lens is this big, and a cinema zoom is 3-4 times this size. So we keep the weight down by going with the primes like that. So that'd be about the only time I would feel comfortable with a clip-on matte box. This one has a double stage, so it can hold 2 filters. So I could put an ND filter in here and an optical flat, let's say, or I could stack a couple of ND filters to get a really beefy reduction of exposure if I needed to, if we were shooting outside. Otherwise, the option is using a lens hood, and a lot of the lenses come with a little pedal lens hood like this. Okay, which is fine. It'll knock some of the stray light from getting into your shot, but not all of it. It's not as efficient as a matte box. So it all depends on what you're doing, but the matte boxes are designed to hold your filters. They were also designed to hold what we called hard mats, which is where the name matte box comes from. You can see in this image, the Crozier has a mat dropped into the front, and that is basically a 16:9 mat that popped into the front of the matte box and helped block, more stray light from coming into and down the pipe, we call it, down the barrel of the lens and flaring the lens. Okay. My Schneiders have the mats built in, so I would just turn these knobs and I could activate the flaps, okay, which would help block the stray light from hitting the front of the lens. Okay, and if that wasn't enough, we could go to something like an eyebrow, all right, which is something that would attach to the top of the matte box and give us even more blockage from the stray light. So between the flaps on the inside and the eyebrow on top, you can keep a lot of stray light from striking the front of your lens. And if you got filters in the matte box, you definitely want to be careful that you're not flaring the lens, because once you flare the lens, you can't get that out in post. It's really, really hard to do. you know, that fogging effect or that veiled sort of gauzy look that you'll get over the image. That's from light hitting the front of a filter at a weird angle and causing it to sort of fog up a little bit. All right, so here's a little GIF I did the other day. I was just dropping filters. I wanted to just show you what it looked like from the front side. As you pull the filter stages, you can see the filters kind of coming in and out of the camera. Like so. They drop in pretty easily, and then you can lock them down with a little lockdown knob. The last kind of matte box I wanted to talk to you about is a matte box that's called a swing away matte box. So it's kind of a cross between a clip-on matte box and a rod-based matte box like the Schneider's. Okay, it's a little bit of both, and I have it on this pocket cinema camera back here. I don't know if you can see it, but I've got a 4K pocket camera here, and I've got a Red Rock matte box, a 4x5 matte box on the front, right? And this is a really good matte box, and I would use this inside shooting on stage if I was shooting with prime lenses all day, because what it does that's different from the Schneider matte box is it makes it easier to swap lenses. So the Schneider matte box is married to the front of the cinema lens, and it's also married to the rods. So I got to loosen everything up. I got to pull the Schneider matte box off, remove the follow focus, and then I can get at the lens and take it off and change it out for something else. But if I'm on the stage inside working with primes and I have a swing away, all I do is go to the New York side or the dumb side of the matte box, and there's a little knob on top. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a little plunge knob. I just pull it up, and the whole matte box will then swing open like a door. This is a rubber donut that I have on here to block light coming from behind the camera from reflecting off of filters. Take my donut off, and I can get at my lens really quick and do a lens change. Put my donut back on, close the barn door, and we're shooting. Okay, so it's a quicker lens change with a swing away matte box. But as a sacrifice, it's not as sturdy as my rod mounted matte box. So I couldn't pick this thing up and manhandle it like I did with this matte box system because it's loose, see? So it's not attached to the front of the lens at all, okay? Which makes it a little less stable, which is why I wouldn't want to use it necessarily outside unless I had a first AC and a second AC and I had enough people working with the camera that it's not going to get accidentally broken off the front of the lens, okay? But this can make your work really fast and efficient on stage. Usually on stage, you're shooting with prime lenses because they open to bigger apertures, allowing more light into the camera for better exposures inside. Okay, your cinema zooms have a tendency to be darker lenses because you're typically using them outside. So they can't achieve the same wide f-stops as prime lenses can. So when you're shooting on your sets on stage, you're probably shooting with primes because they open wider, and you might want to swing away matte box to make your lens changes happen that much quicker, okay? So I talked to you about the types of filters. I talked about color correction filters. Here is your diffusion options. So I have a set of what's called Wilson Superfrost, which are a very rare and sought after set of filters. Not a lot of guys in Hollywood have these anymore. They were handmade, but they are diffusion filters. And I think I put the Superfrost test video on web courses for you to look at. It's kind of hard to see what's going on in this little video, but notice the background. So this is a kind of a misty day, and it's just a shot of these tree branches with some moss on it and some out of focus cars going by in the background. But what you'll see is a reduction in contrast when you put the diffusion filters in front of the lens. And that in and of itself can help extend the dynamic range of your camera. One full stop and sometimes almost 2 stops. With the frost in place, you can see the background gets a little bit brighter. You see that? It's basically brightening up the shadows in your image area, okay? And it's also putting a very small and almost imperceptible amount of softness into the image. And it's what we call a shoot-through filter that maintains the original sharpness. Okay, so you can add diffusion to a filter, to a lens that will reduce the contrast of the image, brighten up the shadows just a little bit, and soften finer details, but the principal harder details like eyelashes and an eyeball and a nose will still appear in focus and sharp, but maybe the cracks around the eye might be greatly reduced by this diffusion filter. Okay, and I can tell you that older, successful, and very sought after actresses love custom diffusion filters that reduce their age lines and wrinkles in their complexion, because as a product, these people are interested in putting their, their best look forward. Okay. And if you have a filter formula for reducing the effects of age on somebody's complexion, you might find yourself working quite a lot, or at least doing cosmetic commercials. If you look at these diffusion filters up real close, you can see there's kind of a grittiness to the surface of the filter. That's because the filter effect of the superfrost was applied by hand by aerosol. Okay, and so it actually has a texture to the surface of the filter, which you have to be very careful of, because you can ruin the filter if you touch the front of it, with your hands. Okay. A lot of these effect filters, like the Tiffin filters and the Schneider filters that I showed you, are actually a glass sandwich. So you'll have 2 pieces of glass, optically clear, and half the thickness of what you got here. And in the middle between them is where the effect is actually applied. So in a Grad filter, it's a dye that they apply to the surface of one of those pieces of glass, and then they glue them together with optical adhesive, so the whole thing is clear, and then they just sort of burnish the edges of the filter to make them not sharp, so you don't cut yourself. Okay, and that's how they create an optical filter. So the effect is sandwiched in between 2 pieces of optical glass. But on these particular aerosol style diffusion filters, the effect was applied to the outside, and so you have to be very careful when you handle them. That's one drawback to the superfrost. But modern digital diffusion filters by Tiffin, for instance, the effects are built into the center of the filters, so there's no vulnerable exteriors you have to worry about. I put this video on your web courses page as well. This is a diffusion test. So whoever it was that asked me the question about diffusion, this video is right up your alley, okay? Because it's going to talk to you about, there's a couple of dozen filters demonstrated here. And what we have is a scenario where we have 2 ladies sitting side by side, and they do kind of a split screen between the image without the filter and the image with the filter, and you can compare the look of the 2 images side by side. And they'll do that for a whole series of diffusion filters. The effects are very subtle, and a lot of times you got to play it back and look at it a few times before you start seeing what you're supposed to be seeing. Watch it on a really big monitor so you can see the detail that much easier. But this particular video from Tiffin is very helpful. It talks about some very popular forms of diffusion: glimmer glass, Hollywood frost, black and white pro mist, Hollywood black diffusion, Hollywood black magic diffusion, black pro mist, white pro mist. There's a number of different diffusion styles that they discuss in this video. It's a very informative video. And here are close-up filters, or what we call diopters. Close-up diopter is kind of like putting a magnifying glass on the front of your lens. And I've got, here's one right here. You can see how the surface of this filter is slightly curved, and you can see the highlight. It looks a little bit concentric, and it's like a magnifying glass. And you can put this on the front of your lens to decrease the minimum focusing distance of your lens. So like a 50 millimeter Rokinon, for instance, I think the minimum focusing distance is like 2.2 feet, something like that, or 18 inches. Well, if you need to get closer than that, let's say you want to do an insert of your actor's watch. They say, hey, what time is it? And he goes, well, it's 10 minutes to 8, right? And you want that cutaway, but your camera's way out here at 18 inches away. And so the watch isn't very big. Well, if you have a macro focusing lens, you can get in very close and photograph the watch big in the frame, right? But if you don't have a macro lens, which can be an expensive rental, you can use close-up diopters instead. And they come in a variety of magnification powers. So you got +1, +2, +3, and +4. And the effect can be cumulative. So you can stack several of these together and just keep decreasing your minimum focusing distance until you get the framing you want on the front of this watch. And this one will take a 50 millimeter, a +2 will take a 50 millimeter and basically get you about, a third of the way closer. And that might be enough for you to go from having a watch that's kind of small in the frame to having the face of the watch really big in the frame, taking up a lot more of the real estate inside your frame line. And that makes a nice insert. Okay, so close-up diopters are a real handy thing to have. This one happens to be 77 millimeter. And all of the information you need to know is printed on the edge of the filter. So it's a Vivitar Series 1 close-up lens +2 power in 77 millimeter. Okay, and I got the whole set here, so there's like 4 of them in the set. The Series 1 close-up. So I got a +1, +2, +3, and +4 in this little filter wallet. And I can screw them right on the front of my, say, 50 millimeter lens and make a macro lens out of it and get a really nice shot of bugs. You can get, close-ups of, insects and whatever you want, the inside of the workings of a watch, the face of a watch, the face of a cell phone. If you do an insert of somebody's text message on the cell phone, you can do that with a close-up diopter. Okay, you can get the image to look a lot closer. So there's a lot of things that you can use these for. They're pretty handy, and they're not really expensive to acquire, but they're worth their weight in gold, even if you only pull them out once in a blue moon out of your accessory bag. They can make a difference at the right time.
Split diopters. My favorite director of all time, Brian De Palma.
Yeah, De Palma. Tarantino used split diopters. And they used to use split diopters.
Are they kind of dated? Would you say they were kind of dated now?
Well, there's been a resurgence, right? I mean, Tarantino used one in The Hateful Eight, and that was only a couple of years ago. So
I remember he did it in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, he did it in Pulp Fiction as well. That's right. So I think what we're experiencing here, there's so much about filmmaking to know and to experiment with and to try. And I think what happens is we get groupthink, right? Everybody on YouTube is talking about, shallow depth of field. So for like 3 or 4 years, all we hear about is Canon 5D and 50 millimeter 1.4 and 50 millimeter 1.2 and how to get your background soft. And everybody kind of jumps on the bandwagon and sort of follows each other around philosophically instead of, just kind of doing your thing, right? And what you see is somebody remembered, hey, you know what? Once upon a time, I didn't have to have a macro lens. I could use a split field diopter if I wanted my background and my super close foreground to be in focus at the same time. I need a split field diopter. Okay. And so what we get is we get these almost novelty or nostalgic uses of a filter that used to solve a very basic problem for a cinematographer who didn't have nearly as many lens choices 50 years ago as we have now, right?
Yeah, because I'm kind of saying a lot of these filters kind of have a bad repertoire. I know you talked about kind of the blue screen filter, and if you remember in like the early 2000s, Steven Spielberg used them on like AI and Minority Report, and they kind of got flacked for that. And like now you put like the orange filters over like scenes set in Mexico or something. So a lot of the filters are actually becoming like jokes throughout the film industry. I kind of find that funny, but in a way,
I don't know why it would be a joke. It's just a creative tool that you have
yeah, exactly.
in your repertoire. I mean, what kind of person laughs at the diversity of brushes you have to paint with?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who probably doesn't have the same amount of skill as you have,
They
or
want everything
access,
They
or
want-
somebody who's riding pine on the couch, playing, weekend quarterback while you're out there working for a living. So I wouldn't put too much faith or emphasis on criticism like that. Anybody who laughs at you for using a bona fide technique is a hack. Okay. Filters they're a skill that if you're going to be a cinematographer, you should know how to use filters, because let me tell you something. If you don't have a Panavision macro lens, a 90 millimeter macro, and you need it to shoot a diamond ring on your movie, you got to rent it. Okay. And that rental might cost you $500 for the day. So the producers have to find $500 in the budget for you to have your macro lens. Okay. And if you have a little bit of brains, or if you have a diopter set that you could buy for $30 on Amazon, you could solve that problem with one filter from a $30 set. So for about $7, you solved a problem that they would have had to rent a lens for $500 to solve. Okay. And I'll do you one better. When I talk about brains, I'm talking about knowing your equipment and what your equipment is capable of. We were on a shoot on a TV series one time, and I was working for the visiting DP on the show was John McPherson. And he had just a few months prior to coming to our show, had just wrapped up post-production on Batteries Not Included for Steven Spielberg. Okay. And we were shooting in the kitchen set on stage on this TV show we were working on. And the script called for, there was a woman washing dishes at the kitchen counter, and she's looking out the window and reminiscing about something in her past. And she took her wedding ring off and put it on the windowsill so she could do dishes, like you might have seen your mother do 100 or 1,000 times. Okay. Because the ladies don't like to use their expensive jewelry while they're washing dishes in the sink. The rock might come loose, or the ring might slip off the soapy water and go down the drain. Then dad's got to pull out the plumbing kit and pull out the trap and get the ring out, right? Put the ring on the windowsill. The script called for an insert of the ring sitting in the windowsill. All right. You can't get a shot of a ring smaller than this, because I got sausage fingers, smaller than this, sitting on the windowsill from even 2 feet away with a Panavision Primo 50 millimeter lens. This thing's going to look like an ant in the frame. Okay. And John said, do we have a macro lens? And of course, the first AC said, no, we don't have a macro lens. And they looked at the diopters, and the diopters weren't getting them close enough. Okay. Now, I had been a photographer and I did it for a living. And so I knew the principle behind what a macro lens is doing. It extends the focal distance inside the lens to a point where you can get an extremely close proximity to your subject. All right. And I knew that if we took the 135 millimeter lens out of the lens box, and instead of putting it on the camera the normal way, if we turned that lens around, and if I held that lens over the lens port like this, that John could shoot through the back of the 135 at a distance of 6 inches away. And John took a look at me and he winked and he said, I'll be damned. And we got the shot of the diamond ring from 6 inches away in macro, and we got the insert that they needed, just because I understood what a macro lens did and how I could make 135 mil lens act like a macro lens, because I had done it many times before when I was taking pictures. Like I said, I was a nobody from nowhere. I didn't have any money when I was a young photographer. So every piece of gear that I bought was a sacrifice in some drastic way. And there was no way I was going to be able to afford a macro lens. But they used to make a little gimmick, a little ring called a reverse adapter. And it had a lens flange on one side and a filter thread on the other side. And I had a 49 millimeter reverse adapter for my Olympus lenses when I shot photography using my Olympus gear. And I could take my 50 or my 135, turn it around, put the reverse adapter on the camera and thread that lens on backwards and make a macro lens out of a regular lens out of the lens bag. And I took that same principle for a 35 millimeter film still camera and applied it to a Panaflex. The problem with the Panaflex is it has a PL mount, so you can't thread anything onto the film port of a Panavision camera. You stick the lens in and turn the knob and it locks the lens in place. So that's why I had to hold the lens with my hands. And the reason I cupped the lens with my hands was to keep stray light from getting around the lens and entering the lens port and hitting the film. So I blocked the light with my hands while holding the lens in place, and John just tilted down, focused, and shot the ring. Okay. And that cost nothing. But I'll tell you what it did for my career. I never wanted for a job after that. People wanted me around as the Swiss Army assistant, right? This kid has all kinds of little tricks in his pocket. You never know what he's going to say next. Let's keep him around. And at a very young age, I started working a lot by understanding what my gear would do and being willing to share that with people at the right moment when it really mattered. Okay. So if you know what you're doing, and if you study hard and you learn these little tricks, okay, and you can laugh at me all you want. That DP was an Academy Award nominated DP who had worked for Steven Spielberg. And he looked at me like I had three heads that day, because he was totally surprised that a little 20-year-old kid in Orlando would know how to do that. And he was impressed. And it's because he was impressed, I got more work. That's the name of the game, kids, right? It's all referrals and it's all reputation. So the more you know, the more dangerous you are to your competition. So if somebody laughs at you because you're using filters, laugh to yourself, laugh back at them, because you know something they don't know. And sooner or later, that information is going to pay off. I promise you. Sooner or later, it's going to pay off. Okay. A couple more things and I want to let you go. We're actually doing pretty good on time. Neutral density filters. These are sunglasses for your lens. Okay. Neutral densities come in different sort of nomenclatures. We have several different ways of describing the same neutral density filters, in other words. In this particular example, they're calling it normal, which is no filter, ND2, ND4, and ND8, okay? I've given you a little reference sheet in the downloadable PDFs, and it tells you what the exposure compensation is for these different filters. You're gonna need that week after next when we talk about exposure calculation. But for now, suffice it to say that from normal, which is the panel to the far left, you can start reducing your exposure or reducing the amount of light that's coming through the lens by half, half again, and half again, okay? And that's the same as adjusting the f-stop on your lens, for instance, one f-stop at a time, okay? Each of these densities represents one full f-stop of change in exposure, okay? And you can make the image darker, or more importantly, you can reduce the amount of light coming through the lens so that your image doesn't get blown out and overexposed. And that's exactly what I had to do out here when I went to the Cape on Sunday, looking for something to shoot using neutral density filters and neutral density grads. And one of the bridges that crosses the causeway over the intercoastal leading to NASA looked like this, right? So I had the bridge in the background, the sky's all blown out, right? I set the ISO, or the sensitivity of the camera, as low as I could go. It was 200 on the camera. I was using the little GH5, I think, with this lens, actually, the 20 to 70. So the minimum aperture on here is T2.9. The maximum aperture is 22. So in order to make this image look like something, I had to crank the f-stop all the way down to 22 in order to get the density of the image to look good and to have detail in the clouds and blue in the sky. So I had to close the lens basically all the way down. For a shot like this, that might be okay, right? That might be exactly the thing you want to do, because at f22 or T22, you preserve all the detail here in the, this is the Titusville Marina right here. So all these dock pilings and everything, and there's boats tied up in here, and there's a lot of fine detail that if you're looking at it close up, f22 is going to help preserve all that detail. But there might be times when you don't want all this detail from the foreground extending through to the background. Like if you're shooting, a couple of people on a romantic walk in the park, you might like the out of focus trees in the background and people crossing in the foreground being out of focus and not sharp as a tack. You only want your marquee actors being sharp because you want your audience to concentrate on their dialogue, right? So sharp details in the foreground and the background might distract your audience from that objective. So you don't want to shoot at f22. So you might want to shoot at f2.8 or T2.8 or T4, okay, which is on the low side of the spectrum with really wide apertures where you don't have a lot of depth of focus, right? And the only way you can do that is by reducing the amount of light coming through the lens. So you're going to use these ND filters. And when I start pulling them and putting them into the filter stages, you can see that happening. I can knock the exposure down with the ND filters and leave my f-stop wider open. Okay. Now I'm focused to infinity here, so it's kind of, it's going to be hard to tell, but you can see me drop the filter and you'll see the exposure change as a result of that. Come on. Drop a filter. There we go. All right. So what I put in there was a neutral density 6, which is a 2-stop reduction filter. And then I dropped an ND3 on top of that, which is a 1-stop reduction. So an ND3 reduces the amount of light coming through the lens by half. The ND6 reduces the amount of light coming through by a quarter. When I add those two together, I get the effect of f22 or T22, but the lens is actually only set to I think it was T5.6. Okay. So I had a shallow depth of field setting, but I had the right density of the image with blue sky and detail in the clouds as a result of using the ND filters. Okay. And then I went one step further and applied a polarizer, which I'm going to talk to you about next. The polarizer has the effect of reducing glare on surfaces like water, glass, metal. It'll also reduce reflections in windshields or windows, and it will increase the color saturation like in the sky. And so I think what I did is I pulled the N3 filter out of the matte box and I put in the polarizer and adjusted that. And then you'll see the water gets a little darker and I think the sky gets just a little bit bluer. So that's pulling the N3 filter. So now there's only an N6 in the matte box. You still got detail in the clouds though. It's a little blown out under the bridge now as a result of pulling the N3 filter, but I'm going to put the polarizer in on top of the N6 and get all that color and density and detail back again. Come on. There we go. There it is.
The clouds earlier, wasn't it?
What's that?
Kind of hard to see the clouds earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, but now you can see them, right? Because now I got the polarizer and the N6 in place. So I got all this detail in the clouds. The sky got even bluer with the polarizer and the water looks a little darker as well. the water was looking kind of swampy without the polarizer. Now it kind of has a darker, bluer look to it, less reflection on the wave caps. The detail is all nice and sharp under the bridge at the marina. The sky's nice and blue and the clouds have detail in them. Nothing's blown out. Okay. So a polarizer is a neutral density filter with extra special powers of reflection reduction and color saturation. Okay.
Do you even have to touch the ISO when you use these ND filters, or
A lot of the time, no. And the reason why you use an ND filter is so you don't have to play with your ISO, or you don't have to play with your f-stop. If you are using a particular ISO out of necessity, okay, some of the camera manufacturers like Blackmagic will tell you, yes, you can use our camera at 3200 ISO and shoot in the dark, but you're going to get a lot of noise. If you want your images to be as clean as possible, you need to use our cameras at ISO 800. Well, ISO 800 needs 4 times as much light for a proper exposure as ISO 3200. We're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. All right. So if you definitely have to use ISO 800, then changing your ISO to accommodate your shot is not an option, right? And sometimes you want a particular f-stop for like the depth of field I'm talking about. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. All right. If you want to preserve the amount of focus you have in the foreground and background or reduce it, specific f-stops are going to be required. So the only other option you're going to have is using ND filters to play with your exposure balance, okay, to make the image brighter or darker by using different combinations of neutral density filters, okay? This is how we do it. It's pretty easy when you get the hang of it. And actually, if you didn't have ND filters, I think your life would be a lot harder balancing exposure sometimes in certain situations like that bridge. You know, that was a nightmare without any filters because I could close my lens down all the way and just barely have an acceptable exposure. If it got any brighter out there, I shot that bridge at, I think it was like 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. If I'd tried to shoot that bridge at noontime, I wouldn't have been able to do it without ND filters. It would have been too bright out there, way too bright. So ND filters are a really good skill to understand and to have, but also the polarizer. Okay, so I put the polarizer in the camera, and in these matte boxes, the backstage will rotate because with a polarizer, you need to be able to rotate that filter in order to get the effect to take place. You see the effect on this filter as I turn it, getting darker and lighter, right? So you need to be able to turn that filter. Well, the matte box can't turn because it's married to the rods in the front of the lens, but the stage that the filter is in will turn if you use the one in the back. So the one in the front, towards the front end of the matte box, is rigid. It won't spin, but the one behind it will turn. So you put the polarizer in the rear stage, and when you do it and turn the filter, you get reflection reduction. So if you're doing a car shot, so let's say you got the camera mounted to the hood of your car, and you're driving down the road and you got all this reflection in the windshield. You can't really see the driver and the passenger very well. Well, then you're going to put the polarizer on and turn it until the reflection goes away, and you're going to see the reflection in the windshield as I turn that filter. Look at that. Now you can see into the car. So now you can see the two people sitting inside the car without the reflection on the windshield. And it reduced the reflection of the palm tree on the hood and on the roof of the car. So if you're seeing outside of the windshield, a little bit of the roof and a little bit of the hood, and you don't want to see all these reflections, you got to use your polarizer and turn those right out of the image. Okay. And the polarizer will make your skies darker blue, which is nice. They use the polarizer all the time on those exterior shots of Breaking Bad. Anytime they went out to the desert to do a drug deal or bury somebody in a hole, they had the polarizer on the lens. It just makes those big wide shots of the deserts look that much more impressive. If you like what a neutral density filter does, you can get a neutral density grad. Okay. So the same way we darkened the sky with the coral filter or the paradise blue filter, you can do it with strictly neutral density. So the neutral density filter won't introduce any color bias into your sky, but it will knock down the exposure of your sky incrementally. by 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stops, all the way up to 6, depending on which grad filter you get. Okay. And so this little graphic right here is showing you how you can balance the exposure for the foreground with the exposure of the sky by using an ND grad. Okay. And here's another illustration of basically the same point. So we have a base exposure we need in the foreground to get the grass nice and green with a nice color and not too dark. We got the mountains in the middle of the, in the middle of the frame. And then we got a blown out sky to the left and a corrected sky to the right under an ND grad. So the filter's clear on the bottom. So none of this stuff below the horizon line has any filter effect applied to it. All right. The grad is stopping right along the line of the mountains. Okay. So everything above that horizon line is getting the ND6 and everything below is not getting anything at all. An ND grad filter is a really great secret weapon to have in your camera bag. Okay. So I can't remember what this was all about here. But I had, this is from the bridge shot. So I was shooting with, you see, I had my hero stop set to, first I went to a 5.6 and then I changed my mind and I went to an 8. So I was at T8 with all that polarizer and ND filtration in the matte box, and I was still shooting at an 8. This video, how to use ND grad filters, is embedded on web courses for you. You can watch that at your leisure. Okay. So that's it. So I mentioned the UV filter to you guys at the very beginning of this discussion. And now I've lost my, I don't know what I did with it. Maybe it's up here. Nope, don't know where it is. Anyway, I had my UV filter and I talked to you about it being mostly just a clear filter that protects the front of the lens. But there is actually a very subtle effect that a UV filter applies to your image. If you look at these two side-by-side images right here, you see this kind of blue hazy line along the ridge of the mountains. When you put the UV filter on there, it gets rid of that haze, okay? UV light kind of makes the atmosphere look similar to a really humid day. You ever see a real humid day in Florida where there's like moisture hanging in the air and objects in the distance appear very degaussed or very soft and very, very pastelish in color because you're looking through, it's almost like you're looking through water, right? And you are basically the humidity in the environment. Well, a UV filter can cut through a certain amount of that haze, okay, and restore clarity to your image. So if you use a UV filter outside, it can make your backgrounds and your details in your deep background appear sharper and in better color saturation than without the filter. And at close range, you see virtually no effect from the filter at all. It's kind of like being outside on a foggy day. You know, 20 feet away from you, everything looks clear and fine, but 100 feet away, it's muddled by the fog, right? Well, the UV filter kind of works the same way. Stuff in the immediate foreground doesn't really show you a notable effect, but stuff in the distant background, it can cut through the haze and clear up and sharpen up your backgrounds a little bit, okay? So UV filter can be very helpful to use outdoors. All right, so that's basically it. Next week is your midterm super quiz, I call it. It's not really an exam in my opinion. 30 questions, multiple choice. You'll have an hour to do it. I'm going to open it up for you guys. I took a consensus from my class yesterday, and the consensus was we'll go ahead and have a review class for you guys. It'll be Tuesday night. And then after that review class at about 10 p.m., I'm going to open up the midterm exam and I'm going to leave it open until Saturday night at midnight for you guys. And you can access that quiz at any point from Tuesday night to Saturday night and take it. The minute you open it, you got an hour to complete it, but you don't have to open it right away. You can wait and study and open it Friday night, open it Thursday night, open it Saturday morning. Okay. If you open the quiz at 10:30 on Saturday night, you're only going to have a half an hour to finish it. That's not right. If you open it up at 11:30, you're only going to have a half an hour to finish it because it's going to close at midnight. So don't wait till 11:30 to do it, but you can certainly take it at any point during the week you want once it's open. Okay. So you guys, I'll give you guys a review class on Tuesday's session. Okay. Then the week after that, we're going to study exposure. And that's where we're going to have to start applying a little bit of our brain juice, because exposure is a little bit tricky in the beginning, but once you get the hang of it, I'm going to show you a trick, a way to think about exposure that should reduce the anxiety and make it easy for you to manage this problem with your camera. It's called the exposure triangle, and I'm going to show you how you can lock values into the exposure triangle, so you really only have to set one thing on the camera and everything else falls in line. Okay. So it's a little trick. It's not real bad, but I usually have to slow down considerably when I cover exposure with everybody, because it takes a little time to sink in. Okay. So after our quiz next week, we're going to jump into exposure and then depth of field. And then I think we got to work in a spring break in here somewhere. So I'm thinking that spring break is coming up. We'll do color theory after depth of field. And then I think your spring break is going to happen right in here. It's either right before lighting or just after lighting. So be prepared for your spring break experience as well. And then when we come back, we've only got a couple of weeks. We'll study camera movement. We'll have a study week and we'll have a final, and that'll be the end of the semester. Okay. So we're already talking about the end of this spring semester for you guys. So that's where we're at. Any questions, thoughts, anything you want to share? Any thoughts about filters? Any questions about that? Any questions about anything that we've discussed prior to this week?
So are you opening up the quiz this Tuesday or next Tuesday?
Not tonight, next week after class.
Oh yeah, okay. Because it's that's the 6th, so that's next Saturday, not this Saturday.
So this is week 7. We're covering filters. Week 8, we're going to have your midterm, and I'll open the quiz for you. Class lets out, it could go as long as 9 o'clock, and then it takes me about an hour to convert the video lecture and put it up online and everything. So I'm thinking like by 10 o'clock, I'll have the quiz open for you, and it'll stay open till Saturday night at midnight. Okay. Or it'll be accessible until Saturday at midnight.
I have a question for like the stuff we did.
Yeah.
We didn't go over like anamorphic and telephoto and like spherical lenses. Are we doing that for like another class, another week?
Not in cinematography 1. Okay. I used to talk about stuff like that, and it made the students very uncomfortable. And they said that they were having to learn too much. And so I don't talk about stuff like that in cinematography 1 anymore. That's the kind of discussion I can have with you in cinematography 2. That's what cinematography 2 is all about. Okay. In cinematography 1, everybody's in the film program has to take this class. And there are some people, let's face it, who just aren't cut out for these concepts. Okay. Or they don't want to be a camera person, and that's fine. So to make them responsible for that kind of information would be unfair. So I have stripped down cinematography 1 to the core concepts. That's what we're covering this semester. And then if you want to know more, I've either given you opportunities to learn more, like through my own YouTube videos or extra reading, or you sign up for cinematography 2. Okay. So the people that I get in cinematography 2 are the people who typically want to be camera people when they get out of college. Okay. And I can have a different conversation with you at that point than I can have here. Okay.
Yeah, that actually makes me think of another question.
Mhm.
Personally, for you and your experience, did you always want to be a cinematographer, or were you wanting to be a more director and then you said, I think I'm gonna go with cinematography?
I thought when I got my first 35 millimeter camera at 12 years old. By the time I was 14, I could develop my own film and print my own prints in a darkroom. And I shot all the pictures for the school newspaper, the school yearbook, all the special events. Okay. I was that nerd. I was like the AV nerd, but for photography. And I did that in junior high, and I did that in high school. And I did it for a while when I was a freshman in college too, until I dropped out. So I thought my career path was going to be a commercial photographer. I'm from Rochester, New York. Okay. World headquarters for Kodak, which is the film company, is Rochester, New York. Okay. So where I'm from, most people that lived in Rochester when I was growing up, they either worked at Xerox, which was a company that ultimately became very heavily associated with digital technology, or they worked at Kodak, which was a company that was steeped in photochemical technology. And if you lived in Rochester, you probably went to college at RIT, or you went to local college and you studied things like business and photography, and you became a photographer when you got out of college, right? I thought I was going to be a commercial photographer. But when I moved to Florida and I found out that the film industry was kind of gaining a toehold, I thought it was a perfect time for me to transition from photography to film. And the reason I thought that is because I had a mentor when I was very young, when I was 17, 18 years old, who owned a studio and gave me my first shooting job as a photographer, as a pro at 18 years old. And I used to stay late at the studio a lot of times, cleaning up, helping them break down sets from shoots that they had done or whatever. And Garth would tell me stories about the film business because for a brief period in his career, he had been a camera assistant. And he used to tell me stories about movie cameras and movie lenses and how you had to load these massive magazines with thousands of feet of film in total darkness. And he used to tell me all these stories and really romanticize the notion of working in the film industry. And Garth was really critical to my development early on. He taught me a lot that I needed to know to work in the business as a professional. And so when I learned that I could have access to that industry, if I just went back to school for a little while and took some core classes, documentary film, I took film production, and I took a couple of other core classes. And then I bailed on that and I went to work in the film industry as a camera assistant. Okay. At that point, my objective switched from being a commercial photographer shooting product photography to being a cinematographer. And so I knew at 19 years old that someday I was going to be a cinematographer.
So
I knew
you're
it in my bones.
kind of the Bob Dylan, the times are changing way.
I wish, right? I mean, I'm just a guy, right? I had a
You
good
went from
career
like
though.
blog, or you kind of went from the dark room to now big monitors, computers
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I mean, quite literally. I've been on shoots that have, screened on on IMAX screens.
Because I went like into film school, like I wanted to be like director, but like kind of now I'm looking more into the cinematography lane because I kind of like a lot of films that are more about the images, like Terrence Malick. I really love him. I love, Michael Mann, and I love those directors who focus on images more than, narrative structure.
Yeah.
And so
I
like
can tell you that a cinematographer who works, in the upper echelons of filmmaking has to be as aware as the director. we're just relieved of the anxiety of having to deal with the actors and elicit a performance out of them by appealing to their egos and by doing a lot of rehearsals and doing a lot of things that would tear us away from the one thing that's really more important to us than anything else, which is I fell in love with lighting, which is why I became a gaffer. And I was a gaffer for a long time, both on the East Coast and out in California before I became a cinematographer. I was a gaffer for most of my career.
Yeah, I love lighting too. That's like my two favorite cinematographers are Robbie Mueller and Vittorio Vittorio
Storaro. You know,
Storaro.
I worked with Robbie Mueller, and he's a sharp cat. Yeah.
Yeah, I love his work on like those Wim Wender films.
Yeah.
And Jim Jarmusch. He really knows how to use light, especially like in Paris, Texas, or something like that.
Yeah, he's a neat guy, super smart guy. Yeah, I would love to have worked with Vittorio Storaro. I've worked with people who have worked with him. I've gotten close in the 6 degrees of separation, but I've never actually met the man. Would love to. He's a huge influence. I've read his book, Writer of Light, several times. In fact, I used to use it in some of my cinematography lectures, but I found that Vittorio Storaro, unfortunately for your generation, is somebody who not very many people are aware of who he is or what his accomplishments in the business have been. And that's unfortunate because they call him Il Maestro for a reason. Okay, he's the master. Yeah. And he's, super knowledgeable, super pro education. Very generous in his knowledge and in his time. He loves to give lectures on art. And he's a huge inspiration. And there's so many cinematographers, both men and women, who are super talented, who are out there working every day, creating things, and you don't necessarily suspect that they are at the root of maybe some of your favorite films. Okay, which is why I think it's really important to be aware. You need to know the industry you're trying to get into, and you need to know it deep in the fiber, right? I ask certain people, students of mine, have you seen this movie? Have you seen that movie? And they're like, no. I'd be like, how can you not? Like, I asked my students in my script writing class if they'd seen Jaws. A third of the students hadn't seen Jaws. Okay, I asked them if they'd seen No Country for Old Men. Half of my students haven't seen that movie. How can you not be exposed to these things that are part of the film industry when you want to be in an industry that is so competitive? I can't tell you the number of times as a gaffer or as a cameraman that a director or a producer, more so even than the directors, a producer would come to me and say, have you seen such and such a movie? And I'd say, yeah, I have. And they say, do you remember the scene where so-and-so does that thing and the lighting looked so amazing? And I'd be like, oh yeah, you're talking about the scene where blah, blah, blah happens? Yeah, that. Can you do that here? And I'll say, well, yeah, I think I can. We don't have exactly the right tools to accomplish that, but I can come really close. And I have a vision in my mind of what you want because you just asked me about a commonality of knowledge and information that we share because I've seen that movie. Okay. That happens all the time. So if you don't know who the director was for, I don't know, I was using an example of Forrest Gump for one of my classes the other day. Do you know who shot it? Do you know who directed it? If you don't, you better study it. You better find out because that is what we call
I'm not a fan, but Zemeckis is a good director. I'm not a huge fan though.
It's what we call tradecraft. Okay. If you don't know the people that are moving and shaping the industry that you're trying to be a part of, then you might not be seen as serious. Okay. And this is something that happens when you're hunting big game, when you're out trying to work in LA, these questions come up all the time. Oh, have you seen such and such a movie with so-and-so? Oh yeah. A lot of times it has to do with actors because they're all trying to figure out who they're going to, pander to or solicit to be in their next movie. Right. So it's a lot about actors and directors. But for the technical among us, for the craftspeople, the questions are, Do you know how to use a certain camera? Do you know how to, did you see the dolly move, or did you see the Steadicam move in Atonement? You know, that was a big conversation for a long time, right? Yeah, I saw it. Holy shit. That camera move
Longest.
was almost 7 minutes long, and they only did it 3 times because on the 4th time, the Steadicam operator collapsed from exhaustion. These are things you need to know in here. So when you're dealing with other professionals who are equally as passionate about movies, that you have something to talk to them about. Because if they can't talk to you, they feel like they can't work with you either, because you don't understand where they're coming from, because you didn't see the same movies. You didn't read the same information. You don't know who these directors are or who these cinematographers are, right? You need to make that kind of investment in what you're doing here. Okay. And it's a very serious thing. And I'm constantly shocked at how little folks in your generation want to do this kind of research. Man, when I would work in the industry, I'd go home and I'd be reading industry magazines over a beer before I went to sleep. You know, I'd be taking my 2nd, 3rd, 4th crack at Man with a Camera from Nestor Almendros, reading it by my bedside to fall asleep, right? And wake up the next morning and go back to doing that thing on a daily basis. I ate, slept, and drank the industry. You have to, because there's too much competition. So if you're not willing to do that, then you got to learn to be happy with less. Okay. But I wasn't that guy. I was greedy and I wanted whatever I could get. And so I knew, and I wasn't the smartest guy in school and I had nobody helping me. So I knew either I was going to be damn good at what I was doing or I wasn't going to get very far. I had to be willing to work my butt off, and I had to be willing to study to the point where I was super competitive with just about anybody. That's what you got to do. And if you don't want to do that, be happy working corporate videos for the local companies, because that's where you're going to end up. And that's just, I'm just being straight with you. Okay.
Well needed.
So it's a lot, but man, I tell you what, I've learned from the best in the industry. I've worked with Tom Hanks. I've worked with Ron Howard. I've worked with Steven Spielberg. I've worked with Bob Richardson. Never worked with Martin Scorsese. Kind of don't mind that. I don't really like many of his movies, but I'll tell you what, man, movies like Close Encounters, I feel very honored to say that I am acquainted with and friends with Alan Davio. He shot E.T. Okay. I mean, and so these guys were my heroes, then my mentors, then my friends, right? And that was the world that I was looking to gain access to. That was the world that I was willing to fight tooth and nail to be a part of. Okay. So I can call a guy like Alan Davio a friend, right? He's not somebody in a book that I read about. So you can have the same access. You just got to work for it. That's all.
Do you know Janusz Kaminski? Because he said Steven Spielberg.
Janusz?
Janusz, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't speak that way. Yeah, you've met him? Wow, that's
I haven't met Janusz, but I worked with Mauro Fiore 2 or 3 times. And Mauro was Janusz's gaffer when Janusz was selected to shoot Schindler's List.
Yeah.
And because I know Mauro won the Academy Award for Avatar a few years back. I was on set on a movie with Mauro, and I asked Mauro what it was like to be a gaffer on Schindler's List. And he spent quite a bit of time telling me stories about working on Schindler's List and how he was a very young gaffer who had only recently graduated from film school. He went to school in Chicago. And so did Janusz. And then the two of them, I think they also went to AFI out in Los Angeles afterwards. And Janusz was selected to shoot Schindler's List specifically because he's Polish. Okay. Plus he had the credentials. I mean, he went to film school in Chicago, then he went to AFI, right? That's a huge credential if you have a master's from AFI. And he had a nice looking reel, and he was ethnically exactly what Steven wanted. Steven wanted somebody whose heritage was steeped in the topic that he was going to be filming. which was the Holocaust and the World War, the Nazi occupation of Europe during the World War II. And so Janusz got the call. Mauro's Italian, but he was born and raised in the United States. So, Mauro told me, he said, Mike, I'm going to tell you, when I was working on that movie, I didn't know what I was doing. And I said, don't tell me that. You just shattered my reality, man.
Yeah.
People work up to something like Schindler's List. It doesn't fall in their lap as a matter of course, and if you don't know what you're doing, how is it that you kept your job? I think he was embellishing a little bit, just to make the conversation a little bit more interesting. But the notion that he had no ego about it, and he said, I didn't know what I was doing. I was doing what I was told, and I was experimenting and trying things, and we had Steven to tell us what he wanted. It's not like we were alone unsupervised, so yeah, you can have access to these people, and they're a wealth of information and inspiration. How did we get on that topic?
Who knows?
You were talking, I think you're talking about some like directors or something like that beforehand. Like you were mentioning how
Mauro's a trip. I got to tell you, Mauro Fiore is a trip. He's a really nice guy, and I think he's really talented. And he has his resume has grown in leaps and bounds, especially after Avatar, because once these guys get recognized like that with an Academy Award, they're everybody wants them to shoot their movie. So and he's done some pretty amazing stuff since then. So I'm really, really proud to say that I know Mauro, and I've worked with Mauro enough times to know what he's all about. Really nice guy.
on the topic of lenses, we've seen a lot of subjects on the lenses are being used in the daytime. But I have a question in regards to about a nighttime shot, because like, for example, there's a scene in Watchmen where Rorschach's out in the streets at night. What kind of lens would you use for that?
Same ones you use during the day. Shooting at night is an illusion. You can't shoot at night. Well, you kind of can now with some of these amazing cameras.
Like the first one I saw was like the night shot was.
If you have a Sony A7S II, you can shoot in the dark, man. But should you, would you, could you, do you want to? The images you get out of that A7S II in the dark, they don't look cinematic. And there's a lot of noise that you have to try and solve in post. It's not ideal. Shooting at night, we create the illusion that it's dark by having foregrounds dark and by having the front side of objects be dark and have everything be lit from behind. So all we see are edges. So when somebody turns to the left or turns to the right, they turn into their backlight. They turn into their backlight. They're dark in front. Okay. The background is very dark and contrasty because the lights rake from the side, never light from the front. Never light from the front if you're doing night exteriors. Always light from the back or not at all. And in that sense, backlights we can get shape through, profile lighting. So we know where our characters are because we either see them as a silhouette against a brighter background or we see them as an edge lit object against black. Backgrounds are dark with rake lighting to reveal detail, but not enough front light to fill in all of the shadows. And we create the illusion of darkness, although we have enough light to shoot with a regular lens that we would normally use, just at a wider f-stop maybe. But I can tell you right now, even shooting in the days of film where the ISOs only got about as high as 1,000, I never lit a night exterior that I couldn't shoot at a 2 or a 2.8.
Interesting.
At a 60th of a second at 24 frames. Okay. That means there was a significant amount of light out there that I could rely on to give me enough image at a 2.8 to reveal detail, and then just let the shadows go. Let them go to inky black shadows. That's great, because that's what drives home the illusion of it being dark and nighttime, is the amount of shadows we have in the image. Okay, but I'm still lighting a night exterior shot. I'm lighting my ass off on a night exterior shot. I've got more help and more equipment on set for night exterior than I do for day exterior. because it's very labor intensive to get the looks that you need, but it's very convincing, and you can make an audience think you're outside in the dark and they're really not. You ever notice like a TV show, the scene takes place at night and yet everybody's lit up? Where's the light coming from? Well, if it's done tastefully and if it's done with a sense of dedication to the notion that you're creating the illusion of nighttime, you get really interesting looking night exterior shots, and you can see enough detail, you know what's going on. You can follow it very easily, and yet you believe that you're watching a night exterior happening.
That kind of explains a lot for me in certain terms. Like, for example, the purge takes place in one location the whole film, like a house in a neighborhood, and yet before the power goes out, the whole thing's set at night.
Right.
And then when the power goes out, they have really low lighting to show that the power's been cut.
And it's all coming from behind the objects you're looking at.
Yeah.
Nothing comes from the front. So
think
there's some basic rules. We'll talk about that more when we cover lighting. But there's a few basic rules. If the script calls for night exterior, the first thing we say is, okay, the light's going to have a certain color. We're going to have a lot of shadows, and we're not going to light anything from the front, no matter what, not even fill. Only edge lights, and they're coming from the back. And that's the protocol for lighting for night exterior. And then you look at and you make adjustments to your eye based on what you're shooting. Sometimes they'll use a full key light with white light on an actor that's standing outside, supposed to be in the middle of the darkness. And you'd be like, where the hell is that key light coming from? It's supposed to be dark outside, yet there's a key light on this individual that's full and 3/4 frontal. What were they thinking? Sometimes the filmmakers can sort of forget what their objectives are, and they just sort of light it so you can see. Some DPs will default to what looks nice as opposed to what looks real. And that's where you make your first mistake when you're trying to shoot a feature at $200 million. If you shoot what looks pretty instead of what looks believable, you might lose your job. That makes sense?
that makes sense. Yeah.
There's a lot to know and to study. You don't learn all of this by going to film school. You're going to get a decent head start here at UCF, and then it's going to be expected that you go out and work in the industry, and through longevity and experience, you're going to learn the craft over a lifetime. All right. You're not going to graduate from school knowing everything you need to know to be in the film business.
No.
You'd be in school for 12 years or longer.
That's pretty much a given. Like, you're not gonna you're kind of giving a starting point here right now. Wouldn't you agree?
Man, I'm still learning, and I've been in the business over 30 years.
Yeah.
I'm still learning. I'm pushing 40 years now if you count my teaching experience, because I don't stop learning. Digital cameras for me happened yesterday. When I was your age, it was all film cameras. There was no digital. Video was terrible. If you shot video, you were considered, it was like, oh, he's a video guy, it's kind of a joke. Video was horrible in those days. You shot film if you're a filmmaker. And it was 35 millimeter. 16 millimeter was kind of playing around. You were a documentary cinematographer, or you were a real low budget filmmaker if you were shooting 16. If you were a pro, you shot 35 minimum. If you were serious, you were shooting Super 70, right? Or bigger, IMAX or CinemaScope, So, for me, it was film. So when digital cameras came out, I started a company in Los Angeles called Mind Made Media, and I was doing commercials and stuff. And that's where I started learning about digital cameras, because the technology was finally starting to catch up with the quality and the expected output that film was giving us for generations. And when that started happening, I had to start teaching myself digital cinema cameras and digital cinema techniques, right? So you never stop learning, even as a professional. You're going to get just enough information to make you dangerous when you get out of school. And then it's going to be expected that you're going to continue to learn when you get out there. So if you don't like being a student now, maybe it's different when you have the incentive of employment to sweeten the pot.
Yeah.
Okay, whereas now it's like grades and that's about it. You know, you're getting your degree, big deal, you know. But it really does mean it really is important, and you'll never stop.
Wait till money has to factor into it.
Hey man, I'll tell you what, money's a hell of an incentive, right? If all you got to
Exactly.
do is a little bit of studying and get some work experience under your belt and do a little supplementary reading once in a while to double your income over a year, you'll do it. I guarantee it. Because once you start earning a paycheck doing this for a living, there's nothing more intoxicating in the world.
Yeah.
And if you think you can double, triple your income by doing a little extra studying while you're in your off time, you'll do it. I guarantee you'll do it.
There's another subject I want to touch on, but I don't think it would be. It's relate. I don't think it's appropriate to this discussion, particularly because it's not related to it.
Are you implying that you're about to become inappropriate?
No, it's just that I don't think that that contributing to the conversation would be relevant.
Well, then why don't you schedule a one-on-one Zoom with me and we can cover the topic in private.
Okay.
Just send me an email and let me know when you're free and available.
Okay.
Okay. All right, folks. Well, it's coming up on 9 o'clock. You've burned the whole 3-hour session this week. How extravagant of you. I can tell you my Monday class wouldn't have put up with this. They'd be like gone already.
You said like you're a mentor to a lot of us. If you see it or not, you really are. Your life.
one hardcore holdout on Monday that kept me for an extra 45 minutes with questions. Otherwise, everybody else was like they were gone.
Yeah, no, your life experiences are really enlightening to me. I know to me, probably to everybody else as well.
I just hope it helps. That's all I can say.
Oh, it does. It really does. It's an eye opener, man. It's an eye opener.
I made a promise. I told this to the search committee when they called me in to interview. I told them I made a promise to the union. When I joined the union, they made us promise that we would mentor the next generation of filmmakers because they were about to bestow on me the generational knowledge and experience of thousands of capable technicians that came before me. The processes that we use in the film industry today are the product of time and experimentation and experience on the part of a lot of people that are nameless in history in the film business. We hear about Steven Spielberg and we hear about Vittorio Storaro and we hear about Tom Hanks, and we know those names because they're high profile individuals. But for every guy like Steven Spielberg, there's 1,000 technicians out there in the industry that live, work, raise families, retire, and pass away, and they are anonymous, okay? And so when you join the union in particular, you're getting all of that fraternity and tradition that's bestowed upon you. The mentors that are in the guild at the time that you join, they teach you what you need to know. They turn you into a professional technician. And then they say to you, if we're going to do that for you, and if we're going to give you this opportunity to have this amazing career, then when your time comes, and you'll know when it's time, when your time comes, you have to pay it forward. And I said, to this I swear. And then they indoctrinated me into the IA. That's why I'm here. You guys are it. I don't do this for a living anymore. Not nearly enough, not nearly as the way I used to. So my role now is to inspire you to go out and do your thing. And if there's anything that I can give you along the way that will help you in that goal, that's why I'm here. I'm here to tell you the truth and the real story about what happens out there. I'm not here to bullshit you and tell you fantasy stories about how everything is unicorns and rainbows out there and that you're wonderful and you're going to be embraced with open arms when you go to LA. They don't know you and they don't want you. You're going to have to earn it. You're going to earn everything that you get from the film business. And I'm here to tell you the truth about how that works and give you hopefully a few skills along the way that you can turn into a paycheck, so you don't end up waiting tables and dreaming about being involved instead of out there kicking butt. Okay? That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, facts.
All right? So take that and sleep on that tonight. Okay?
Will do.
You got it.
Let's go home, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions about the lecture, the content, or anything coming up? You good?
No. Good.
All right, folks. Then have a good evening. I'm going to put this whole thing to bed, down convert your lecture and put it up on web courses for you. And then I'm going to relax with a cold one because it's time. All
I
right.
got one more year before that.
What's that?
I got one more year before that.
Oh, well, really? Oh, shit.
I'm 20. I'm not 21 yet, but I got one more year.
Oh, well, that's okay.
That's fine.
That's all right. That's good. That's a good time. It's a good time for you. You got your best years are ahead of you. And don't worry about being 20. You know, we're all 20 at one point, right? So I can remember when I was 20 and I was brand new in the business. Man, I got hazed and made fun of, and I got all the crappy jobs, and you know, I had to sweep the truck all the time instead of being on set around the actors that I was wanting to see. Or I was really enthralled with the camera. I couldn't take my eyes off the Panaflex for a long time. I knew that that was where I belonged, next to that camera. And so every chance I got to go on the set and just drool and ogle at that camera, I was in there. And then when they realized it, they'd kick me out, tell me to go clean the truck, right? That was my 20-year-old experience in the film business. So I remember that fondly, though, because that's, you go through that as it's, you know, it's one of those things we call paying your dues, right? Before the old guys are going to tell you the secrets of everything they know, they're going to beat you down a little bit and humble you. So, but it's a good time. It's a real good time. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. So, and now it's your turn. All right. Think on that, and I'll see you all next week. Have a good night. Thanks for coming.